Hello friends. In this video you will see a manhwa called To Those Who Long for My Destruction. Please put a like and subscribe if you like this video. Thank you. Let's go.
No one remembers how it all started, but House Heidegger, a clan of outstanding swordsmen, and House Wangler, who inherited the abilities, were ready to at each other's throats at any chance they got. Armed conflicts between these families were almost commonplace. However, during one of the countless battles, one of the princes intervened and lost an arm. The angry emperor said that he wanted to end this feud once and for all, and so House Heidegger and Wangler would have to unite their houses by marriage. Only in this way could they prove their loyalty to the crown. This is where all their misfortunes began. In the estate of House Wangler, the son of this family was outraged that he would have to have child in common with this vile woman that goes by the surname Wangler. He said that his father was well aware that his heart already belonged to another woman. Marquis Gideon Heidegger tried to change his father's mind, but he only said that it was the emperor's order. The older man said that it would already be better for his son to take on the emperor's wrath alone than to make the whole clan suffer. Although that day was the height of despair for Gideon, for Paula Wangler, it was the happiest day of her life. At Wangler Manor, Paula could not believe that she would become the wife of the Marquis Heidegger, for this was her dream. The maid who brought the news to her mistress said that she had never thought my lady would think so highly of Lord Heidegger, and asked if it meant that her mistress was pleased with this arrangement. Paula replied that, of course, she would be happy, for she would be marrying the man of her dreams. However, everyone realized that happiness could not coexist with despair. The first wedding night of the young spouses was not as the former Miss Wangler had imagined it. On her request to stop in words that she was hurt, Lord Heidegger only ordered her to be silent and said that he would rather sleep with a whore than with someone like her. These words hurt the girl, and this was clearly not what she had envisioned. This was not the marriage she had always dreamed of, but a real nightmare. One day the emperor summoned Gideon to him, and asked why he and Paula Wangler still did not have a child. The ruler had already begun to suspect that they were only pretending to be a happy couple. The emperor said that the newlyweds should hurry up and have a child as soon as possible, because they had to prove their loyalty to the crown. Soon, after so many humiliating nights, the child everyone had been waiting for was born. However, Marquis Heidegger was not eager to see his newborn daughter. Even so, everyone realized that the emperor would be pleased with it, without the wishes of the mother and father. That's how Leonia was born into the world. So the girl was named because of her bright red hair, like a lion's mane, just like her mother's, and in the hope that she would grow up to be as brave and strong as a lion. All the servants doted on the little miss, however, her mother always remained aloof from her, even though the girl was deprived of parental love, but was not deprived of material wealth. One day Marquis Heidegger burst into the room, where Leonia was playing, and her mother was with a sword in her hands. He began to shout at Paula and accuse her of having killed some woman, because she knew that he had loved her before. At this point, it was as if the former Wangler had been switched. Her eyes were crazy, and she replied to her husband that she had nothing to do with that dead girl, and he should just admit that, because of the imposed marriage, he blames her for everything bad that happens in his life. When a maid rushed to the quarreling couple and asked them to calm down, the Marquis swung his sword and slit the poor woman's throat. Seeing all this senseless cruelty, the still very young Leonia began to cry, and the rest of the servants tried to calm the raging lord. When the girl grew a little older, she began to follow her father everywhere, hoping that at least this way he would notice her. Her grandfather told Gideon that the girl had been following him all day and asked why he didn't at least say hello to her. Gideon may not have loved his daughter, but she was still his only child. To such questions and requests, Gideon would only reply that the girl looked almost exactly like her mother, and it disgusted him to see it. The girl tried to get close to her mother as well, but whenever the woman saw the green eyes that Leonia had inherited from her father, she would become hysterical and scream that those green eyes would kill her. One day in class, she asked the teacher where her daddy was. The man had to lie to the girl that her father was too busy and couldn't see her, but really he felt sorry for the little girl. without the attention of her father and mother. All she does is draw pictures, as if begging for at least a little attention from them. A couple years later, Gwyden inherited his father's duchy and became a duke himself. He arranged a lavish reception in this honor, where more nobles were invited. At this event, everyone told the young duke what a magnificent inauguration ceremony he had organized, and also did not forget to talk about how brilliantly he fought in the last battle. Everyone called him a true master of the sword. Leonia watched her father from the second floor and thought that her father seemed happy today. The girl decided that if he was, she should give him her drawing and maybe he would like it. However, the gods apparently decided that even such a tiny hope would be too much for the little girl. The moment she wanted to go to her father, one of the servants informed the little mistress that she would have to prepare to say goodbye to her mother. The little girl was horrified at this. She dropped all her drawings and rushed as fast as she could to her mother's chambers. She thought that all this just couldn't be happening. She had barely seen her mother all those years, and now she would never see her mother again. At the entrance to her mother's room, the maid did not want to let the girl in. She said that Leonia's presence would only make things worse. The girl was very upset and thought that even at times like this, she is still one of those people who can be ignored. Upset, the girl ran away from her mother's chambers, and one of the maids made a remark to her that she should not run down the corridor like that because they had guests. The second maid said not to stop the girl because it seems that she was not allowed to see the Duchess again. This time, like dozens of others, Linnea took her horse and rode away from the manor. She kept wondering why her parents hated their own child, why they didn't care about her and what she had done wrong to deserve such a thing. Suddenly the girl was struck by lightning and fell off the horse, losing consciousness. The girl woke up in her room and, not fully understanding what was happening, sat on the bed. This was noticed by her butler and excitedly asked if the little lady was all right. He said that she had fallen from her horse and had been lying unconscious for several days. But the girl did not seem to care about that at all. The first thing she asked was if her mother was still alive. The butler said that the Duchess was still alive, but why would the girl ask that so suddenly? Leonia got out of bed, but the butler said that she should not go out yet, as the body needs time to recover. However, the girl didn't listen. She got up and stubbornly left the room, saying that she needed to see her mother. Because of this behavior of the young mistress, the butler thought that she was not herself today. Seeing the little mistress again near her mother's chambers, one of the maids asked why the girl still came here. After all, the woman had already told her everything. But Leonia did not let the maid finish, and said that when a dog barks at its master, it means that it deserves a good whipping to remind the dog who its master is. These words and the too cold expression on the girl's face made the maids uncomfortable, and they couldn't understand what had happened to her, for she wasn't like this before. Leonia ordered the maids to step aside and let her pass, and the women bowed and obeyed the order. When Paula looked at her daughter, she did not seem to recognize her. She remembered her daughter as a sweet, cheerful girl, but now she stood before her with a serious face and a cold look, and addressed her not as her mother, but as Lady Heidegger, standing by her mother's bedside. Leonia said it must be painful, as bad a mother as Paula had been. Leonor realized how horrible her life had been. The girl climbed onto her mother's bed and said in her ear that she promised her that she would do everything in her power to make him know despair. Leonia told her mother that she would make him suffer with her own hands. At these words, the exhausted Paula opened her eyes and looked at her daughter, reached out and stroked her cheek. Then she twirled a strand of fiery red hair between her fingers. The girl was surprised at her mother's behavior. She said that even if only for a few days, she prayed that at least in this remaining time her mother would be happy. Duke Heidegger watched from the window of his chambers as Leonia wheeled her mother in her wheelchair out into the garden. He said he had heard from the servants that Paula had not long to live, but as he could see now, the woman was still hanging on. The counselor who was with the gentleman said that according to the doctors, Lady Paula was not now healing, but rather using the remnants of her strength. The Duke was not very pleased with this, and said how much longer he would have to endure this sight of her. Suddenly Duke Heidegger asked how old his daughter was now. Counselor Oslo was surprised, as the Duke had never asked about the little lady. Oslo said that little Leonia turns 10 years old at the end of this month. The Duke said there would have to be a celebration. The counselor had already rejoiced that Gwyden was finally interested in his daughter. But, remembering something, Oslo said that they were not ready for such a thing yet, since Gibidon himself had forbidden such celebrations after Leonia's second birthday. Oslo spread some papers on the table, and said that it was a report on what Mrs. Leonia was doing. Basically, after the academy, the girl stops by the local cafe with her new painting supplies. Gwyden was surprised that his daughter was drawing, and asked if she was sure she could do it. Oslo said that the young miss is very good at it, and is very talented. Even the Imperial Academy itself has offered to hold an exhibition of her work. Gwyden said that the exhibition was a complete nonsense and should be refused by the Academy. Oslo, of course, was upset, but he couldn't cross his master. The Duke also asked if his daughter's grades had changed. The counselor said that the girl was doing well and was ranked second in her class in grades this semester. Gwyden said with annoyance that at least she had gone differently from her mother in intelligence. He also asked the counselor if the girl had begun to show any mystical abilities. At least one person in every generation of the Wangler family inherited mystical abilities, and each time they were so different that they could not be evaluated in any way by the standard grading system. One of their family predicted the future, another controlled the weather. There were even some who could control other people. But it was said that with each generation in the Wangler family, the magical gift grew weaker and weaker. If Leonia could awaken some of those powers, she wouldn't have to suffer as much as she did now. Oslo replied that the Wangler's abilities usually manifested themselves. At the age of 15, and only time would tell if she had inherited any abilities or not. The Duke was not very pleased with this answer, and asked what about the girl's swordsmanship. After all, she is half Heidegger, she should be able to create at least some semblance of an aura. Oslo replied that the girl would need more training in that area as well. Gwyden chuckled in thought. He thought that the real purpose in bringing their families together was the Emperor's hope, that the offspring of a sword master and a mage would be a child with incredible abilities. How ironic that the result was such a useless child. Gwyden asked the counselor if there would be anything else concerning his daughter. Oslo said that Leonia had recently visited Countess Stein Michelson's salon, and 3 times at that. Duchess Stein Michelson is a lady who deals with the execution of secret errands for nobles, but the only condition for her services is that anyone who applies must then fulfill any request of the Countess, whatever it may be. Gibidon was angry, for he knew what kind of woman she was, and asked Oslo what business his daughter could have with this vile woman, and why she went to her. Oslo said it was rumored that the Countess had recently acquired some rare books from the East for sale, and Miss Leonia had only acquired a couple of books on Oriental art. Looking at his daughter through the window, Gwyden thought that she was only 10 and had not asked him for anything, which meant he had nothing to worry about for now. He told the counselor that the only good thing about his daughter was her face, so he should get to work on finding a groom for her. He told Oslo to choose someone who would offer a bigger dowry, and the Duke also asked the counselor to call a doctor. A concerned Oslo immediately asked if the gentleman was not feeling well. Gwyden said he only had a worse headache. In the beautiful garden, mother and daughter were sitting in a quiet place. Paula asked Leonia how she wanted to carry out her plans. The girl answered that she would do it slowly. They would be like frogs floating in boiling water, not even realizing they were dying. Paula said that the daughter should make them beg for death, for her sake, and that one day Leonia would have children too, and would she then be able to understand what Paula had felt all this time? The woman said that seeing her husband's disgusted face in the face of her favorite child was her cruelest curse. Leonia was surprised at her mother's words and asked if she loved her. Paula said she prayed every day and every second that her daughter would not repeat her fate, and asked if that was not what love was. Leonia said her mother's prayers had been answered. Paula looked up into the sky and said that it had been 3,774 days and 15 hours since she had been here. She apologized to her daughter for leaving her alone, to which Leonia said it was okay. Lastly, the woman said she was sorry. Leonia replied that she believed her and stood up from her chair and said goodbye to her poor mom. When the girl was on her way to leave the garden, at the gate she was met by a maid and asked if the young mistress needed anything. Leonia, on such a question, only turned around and said to prepare for the funeral. There was a lot of talk around the estate about Lady Heidegger's unfortunate fate. Some heard that the upcoming funeral was only a matter of time, for Lady Heidegger was already at her last breath. At such a turbulent time for the Heidegger household, no one could find Leonia in the manor, and people thought she was in her room. The girl was heading somewhere, and she was being followed from the back alley by Oslo, who had been ordered to do so by Duke Heidegger. However, the girl was heading to the forbidden section of the royal library, and he couldn't follow her there. Besides, Oslo had questions as to why the girl would go here right in the middle of preparing for her mother's funeral. In one of the aisles between the racks of books, the girl was politely greeted by a man and told that His Majesty was already waiting. The girl walked to the proper place and made a polite bow, saying that she was always at His Majesty's service. On the day of the funeral, everyone in the Heidegger home was busy preparing for the ceremony. Leonia was helped to gather by one of the maids. The woman said that many important people would be visiting their house today, and she asked permission to tie the little mistress's hair, but the girl said it was not necessary. The girl said that she was not going to stay here any longer to please other people. The girl left the room, and on the way she ran into her father. She said hello to Duke Heidegger and bowed politely to him. Gwyden was surprised and wondered since when did his daughter start acting so courteous. He said that he could finally see a face on her that he could look at in peace. And now they could go. Oslo was surprised at this behavior of the Lord, for he thought he would just walk by again and tell the counselor to get rid of the girl. When everyone was gathered in the chapel, many people marveled at the beauty of the place and thought the Duchess would like it too. Leonia looked around the chapel and noticed for herself that the former Duke and Duchess Heidegger had not even deigned to show up. Everyone began to take turns approaching the coffin and saying that the Duchess' soul rest in peace. The royal chamberlain said that His Majesty had sent these flowers to express his deepest condolences. Upon seeing such a gorgeous bouquet, people began to whisper about how this man could have gotten these flowers at this time of year, as they are very rare and only bred in the royal garden. People soon realized who this man was, and were shocked that the Kaiser's representative, the royal chamberlain himself, had personally brought the flowers. The chamberlain said that it was a pity that Duchess Paula could not see what an honor she had received. In the pew where Duke Heidegger was sitting with his daughter, a man asked Leonia where she had been last night. He said she had been nowhere to be found while the funeral preparations were going on. The girl replied that she had been in the library, to which the father said she was out of her mind. After a short silence, Gwydion said that he had prepared a gift for his daughter and was sure that she would be surprised by it. But she should never lose her temper. After all, she belonged to the Heidegger house. The girl thought that he would soon see what real Heideggerian self-control was worth, but she answered aloud that she too had prepared a present for her father and prayed that he would like it. Gwydion said that in that case, he would look forward to it. After the formal ceremony, the guests gathered in the banquet hall, and some began to discuss who would be the next Duchess. Someone said that Duke Gedveden was charming, but rumor had it that he still couldn't forget his late lover. Suddenly, a woman in the crowd said it would be better to talk about the poison cup. She said that noble daughters will lie at the feet of the young duke, so, poisoned or not, the bowl will always be useful. People immediately recognized the mysterious woman as Countess Michelson and began to whisper what she was doing here. Only Duke Dieter Wangler, who was Paula's father and Leonia's grandfather, asked openly. The woman said that the reason she was here was about to appear. The doors of the hall opened and a little girl and some pregnant woman walked in. The little girl immediately ran up to Duke Heidegger, calling him father, and hugged him. People were shocked at this turn of events because they thought that Leia was his only daughter. Duke Gwydion decided to take the floor and introduce the strangers to everyone. The pregnant woman, Magda Lichner, his beloved and future Duchess. People immediately thought of the fact that she looked a lot like Eliza, the Duke's lover who died, which means this is her younger sister. The girl sitting in the Duke's arms was named Sharon. Heidegger, and she was his daughter. The guests immediately thought of Leonia, because to hear such a thing on the day of the funeral of his mother is simply terrible. But the girl who stood aside was not surprised at all, and thought that everything was happening exactly as before. Well, Leonia had to endure 32 years of horror before she could return to childhood. Her stepmother and stepsister never missed a chance to abuse her, and the servants followed suit. One day, when a servant was helping Leonia clean herself up, she asked where her mother and sister had gone. The maid replied that they had gone to choose a new dress for Miss Sharon, but that Leonia should not expect them to bring her any present. The girl said she didn't count on it at all, to to which the maid simply left, slamming the door and saying that she would bring her food later. In the corridor, the second maid said that she should be more careful. After all, the girl was the daughter of Duke Heidegger. To which the maid replied that why would she do that? Because Leonia's mother was dead and the Duke treated her as an orphan, so the servants should not worry about the girl. Later, the Duke called his eldest daughter into his study to ask if she had any magical abilities. The girl said that the abilities had not yet manifested. Gwyden said that there was no use for Leonia, for she had neither magical abilities nor skill in swordsmanship. The girl, listening to this, wondered if she was so disgusted with her father, because he always told Sharon that he loved her regardless of everything, but Leonia could not boast of that. Her father's voice brought the girl back from her thoughts to reality. He said that he would soon find her a suitable husband, and the girl just needed to make sure that while he was doing that, she would look her best. The girl realized that her father had decided that she had no other use for her but marriage. Gwyden Heidegger sold his daughter's hand 3 times to different men. Leonia Heidegger's first husband was a prince. His title as well as his political influence was nothing, but he was kind to the girl, and they were really happy together. But unfortunately, it only lasted a year before the prince was killed. With her second husband, the girl had a son, Emil. He was more valuable to Leonia than her whole life, but her husband and child suddenly disappeared. So ended her second marriage, but even after that, her father continued to sell her in marriage, arguing that she should bring at least some benefit with her beautiful face. Leonia's third husband was not happy with their marriage, as he was simply forced into it. The girl lived in his neglect, and the only exception was the day the wedding was agreed upon. Then the girl realized that her life was no different from that of her late mother. But apparently, the heavens decided to take pity on the girl. At the moment when she conceived the child of the 8th prince, she manifested magical abilities. The girl decided that they were still too weak and still not fully awakened, so there was no need to tell everyone about it yet. It was better to tell only about the pregnancy, and only to the prince. When the 8th prince learned of his wife's pregnancy, he immediately went to battle. Meanwhile, Leonia swore to herself that she would protect her child at all costs. She was happy to have the child, albeit unborn, but even the faintest glimmer of hope must be suppressed. Suinlania was accused of a capital offense. She was put behind bars, but even there, she continued to say that she was innocent, that she had done nothing wrong and asked to see her father, but Lord Heidegger was deaf to the pleas of his daughter, and all relatives on her mother's side had long since been destroyed. Sitting in prison, Leonia thought about the fact that she still hadn't heard any news about her husband on the battlefield. Why would she worry about that, though? Because even if he was there now, he would hardly protect her and the child. Just the same, she thought of Oslo. That counselor of her father's had always been the only one who truly cared for her. Now he was supposed to make a plan and get the mistress out of prison, but he had been gone for a long time, and Leonia was beginning to worry if the plan had failed, or if Oslo had simply turned his back on her. But whatever the case, right now all she had left was her powers. Biting her finger until it bled, the girl began to draw something on her dress and pray that the gift wouldn't fail her. Suddenly she heard footsteps and leaned against the iron bars, hoping that she would be acquitted and taken away from this horrible place. But it was only an empty hope. Sharon stood in front of her and mockingly said that the floor of the prison so suited her skin color. Leonia asked what Sharon was doing here, but instead of an answer, she received Oslo's severed head, which was thrown closer to the bars of the cage by Sharon's servant. The girl began to cry at what she saw, and Sharon asked if she liked the gift. She also said that she had more news for Leonia. Her husband would soon be emperor, for he had destroyed all his brothers and announced his victory 3 days ago. Duke Heidegger helped the prince with the treason, and upon his return the future emperor agreed to make Sharon his wife, so Leonia would be doing everyone a big favor if she died. Leonia couldn't believe it, and asked what would happen to her baby. Sharon asked if her sister really wanted that baby to survive, because it obviously wouldn't even want to grow up with such a pathetic mother. Laughing, Sharon said that was fine, just like her mother had killed Paula, just like she was killing Leonia right now. The girl was shocked by her sister's words. She couldn't believe that her mom died because of her stepmother, and in a burst of emotion said that Sharon was not a person, but a real monster. Because of this, Sharon got very angry and said that Leonia, despite being so weak and stupid, had always inherited the best titles since she was a child. So Shireen had to become a monster to take it all away from her. She said it was her sister's own fault, and after saying goodbye to her, she signaled her servant to end it. The man with the sword started to approach the girl, but she had already managed to activate her ability. Before doing so, she thought she would give her child a new world where he and she would be loved. Before the girl finally moved into the chamber, Prince Rutger literally flew in, but even he didn't have time to do anything. When she transported herself back to her childhood, she made a promise that all those who had plotted her destruction and prayed for her suffering would regret it, for she would give it all back to them in full. She promised that she would find her children, wherever they were, and for once protect those she loved. In a way, she took comfort in seeing everyone make the same mistakes as in the past, because otherwise the crimes might not match the punishments she was preparing. At the Heidegger house, Duke Gaiden told Sharon that she would have to endure such situations if she wanted to become a real lady. The girl agreed and told Leonia that it was a little annoying that they had agreed to take her into their family. Leonia replied that it was very kind of them, and she wanted to be happy that she had a little sister, but she had better things to do. She thought that since Countess Stein and the Chamberlain were here, all the cards were laid out and all that was left was to sort things out. Leonia had said in front of all the guests that she couldn't accept Magda as her mother, since her real mother had been murdered by that woman. After Leonia's announcement that Lady Paula had been murdered by Magda, whispers immediately spread through the room. People could not fully believe that she had decided to do this because everyone thought that Paula Heidegger's life had been taken by illness. Leonia's maternal grandfather questioned what his granddaughter was saying, and how, and more importantly, why this woman could have killed his daughter. Gaiden didn't believe it either and said it was all nonsense and his daughter had probably gone mad from shock. He said that for something like that you need proof. Countess Stein Michelson intervened in the conversation. She said that the proof was sitting right in front of him. Indeed, there were 2 beaten maids sitting on the floor. Countess Stein said that these maids had been bribed by Lady Magda long ago. They were the ones who poisoned the late Duchess Paula for years on Lady Magda's orders. Also found were their letters of confession, the vials of poison they had used in the murder, and receipts for the medicines Lady Magda had specified. The Countess submitted these as evidence to the Chamberlain for inspection. Gaiden was beginning to get nervous. He had waited so long for this day for him and Magda to finally be happy together, but he had never expected his beloved to turn out to be a murderer. He angrily told Leon not to play with such things, but the girl tearfully begged her father to open his eyes, for he was too important to give up his duties for love. She begged him on behalf of the whole house of Heidegger and the sword of the Empire. Lady Magda began to say it was all nonsense, and Countess Stein thought that this little girl had just managed to turn the mighty Duke Heidegger into an incompetent fool blinded by love. She thought the little girl was too smart for her age. Meanwhile, Leonia went on to say that all this time she had only wanted her mother to get well, so she had reread every book on medicine she could find and realized that her mother's symptoms were pointing to something terrible. She was able to realize that it was called an inheritance potion. Inheritance potion is the name of a chemical better known as arsenic. Consuming it would lead to a slow death that resembled the symptoms of a chronic illness. It was usually used by heirs and relatives arguing over the inheritance of wealth or title. Leonia said her mother often suffered from bouts of vomiting and diarrhea, and she also coughed up blood, and blood ran between her legs. And the girl also knew she was showing signs of dehydration and spots on her skin. Lady Magda became nervous and Duke Heidegger ordered his daughter to shut up, saying that they had had enough of her crazy theories, for they were just frequent symptoms of chronic illness. Leonia lowered her head and said that the day her mom died, she said something, after which everything made sense. Leonia's grandfather walked over to his granddaughter and put his hand on her shoulder, telling her not to be afraid to speak further, for her grandfather was here for her. Looking at her grandfather, the girl gained confidence and continued. She said that the day her mom died, she said that her medicine smelled like soap, and soap was the main ingredient for the inheritance potion. Based on that, everyone realized that all this time, instead of medicine, the late Duchess had been taking poison. The Chamberlain, after listening to the girl carefully, asked her father if he had anything to say about it. Gaiden remained silent, And the chamberlain said that in the name of His Majesty, the Emperor, he orders Magda Lichter to be arrested on suspicion of murder for further investigation by the royal guard. The woman was immediately taken under arms by the guards, but Sharon ran up to her and clutched at the skirt of her mother's dress and began screaming and asking why they were taking her mother away. She looked up to her father in hope, but he could not resist the Emperor's will. He only told the guards that Lady Magda was his wife, and a pregnant one at that, so they should show her every courtesy and respect until she was officially recognized as guilty of murder. Leonia, hiding a satisfied grin in her grandfather's shoulder, thought that Gwydion Heidegger only needed to wait a little longer because she had just begun her revenge. Old Count Wangler thought about the fact that he still had to stop his daughter then at all costs. When Paula was still young and unmarried to Heidegger, her father had suggested that she run away to another country because he suspected something wrong in the marriage. The girl argued and said it was only a marriage, not a battle, so she might as well stay home. The parents were surprised at their daughter's words, that it was only a marriage, as the Emperor himself had made them do it. Then the girl asked what about her younger brother, Yang, what they thought about his future. She would not be able to take a child 10 years younger and live in another country for the rest of her life. The Count said his daughter could settle down somewhere and start over, but the girl declared that she loved Gwydion Heidegger. Her parents were shocked and said that he already had a woman, so Paula should change her mind, but the girl did not listen to them and broke all ties. Now her mother, after learning all this, burst into tears and said that all this time she thought that her daughter broke off ties with them because of that fight. But when the whole truth was revealed, she realized that her daughter should not have done that and hid everything. Paula was probably afraid of what her parents would do when they found out what was happening to her here, and besides, it was her choice. So now she would have to take responsibility for her decisions. While the chamberlain was still gone, Count Wangler approached him and said that, while it could not be said with certainty that Leonia Heidegger's life would be safe in this house, he should allow the grandfather to become the girl's official guardian and custodian. Leonia was surprised at this turn of events, for in the original, her grandfather had been simply infuriated by Gwydionn's announcement of a new wife and had left the capital that very day, never to return to see the man again. But now events have changed, and it's even for the best, because with the House of Wangler, it will be much easier to take revenge and stay safe. House Wangler still has power, and there it will be much easier for Leonia to carry out her revenge. When the question of Leonia's custody was being decided, Countess Stein intervened. She said that the little miss still addressed her father as your lordship, which meant that it was worth reconsidering the man's custody of the child. The chamberlain thought a little, and said that on behalf of His Majesty, he accepted Count Wangler's request. He also said that the Crown would conduct a thorough investigation, and if no crime was found, Miss Leonia could return to her father. He asked if both sides agreed with this decision, to which Count Wangler agreed without delay, and Duke Heidegger simply had no choice, as no one dares to cross the Emperor and his representatives. Having solved all the problems, the chamberlain left and Countess Stein decided to follow his example, saying that she and Leonia would meet again. After the Countess left, Leonia noticed Sharon crying and screaming in Oslo's arms. The counselor tried to calm her down and take her out to talk. The guests began to disperse as well, as the situation grew increasingly uncomfortable. It was only to Leonia's advantage, because thanks to the guests, the whole capital would certainly know about such a racy scene at the funeral of Duchess Heidegger. When all the guests had already left, the Count and Countess Wangler, saying that they had to go, also decided to return home, taking their granddaughter with them. But the girl asked them to wait because she wanted to say something to his lordship, Duke Gwydion. Going up to her father, Leonia told her father to tell Sharon to let her change her clothes, and if she needed to, she could take her older sister's clothes. The Duke was angered by these words and asked how dare the girl treat his daughter as a beggar. Leonia wanted to say something, but her grandmother came up to her from behind and told the Duke that her granddaughter didn't have time to feel sorry for every bastard born to the Duke out of wedlock. She sat down on her knees next to her granddaughter and said that her grandmother was near and she could be unafraid, saying what she wanted. Then the little girl said that she was surprised to hear about the new family, but she was happy that she had a sister because now that she had a sister, she would not be so lonely anymore. Hearing these words from the little girl, tears appeared in Countess Wangler's eyes and she hugged her granddaughter tightly. The girl was new to such a hug, but she continued talking and said that the golden dress that Sharon was wearing was somehow strange. Grandma asked what strange meant, and Leonia explained that she loved to paint and knew quite a bit about colors. Sharon's dress was the color of aura pigmentum. It's a mineral that gives paint a very strong and rich color, and it's often used in paints, but it contains a lot of lead, so you shouldn't touch it without gloves. The teacher at the academy often said that aura pigment is very dangerous, and when it comes in contact with the skin, it begins to absorb very quickly, so the dress that Sharon is wearing now is incredibly dangerous for the girl. Duke Gaiden Heidegger was stunned by this information and couldn't believe it. He said that this dress was customized by Magda and couldn't understand why his lover would do this. He was sure that it was just a mistake and he would kill the scoundrel who made this dress with such a dangerous substance. Count Wangler asked his son-in-law if he was really sure that it was the fault of the tailors. He said that in Magda's place, he hated the Heideggers as much as he hated the Wanglers. Leonia thought it was just as her grandfather said, for Magda believed that Gaiden Heidegger had betrayed her sister. Gaiden cautioned Count Wangler not to dare accuse his wife of anything, but Paula's father said that of course he was sure that everything that had happened today was just part of a larger conspiracy, but if he were Duke Heidegger, he would investigate among the inner circle of people. He also said that he couldn't leave his granddaughter in such a dangerous place, and he and Countess Wangler could take care of Leonia until the investigation was over. Count Wangler's words that the Duke should investigate among the closest circle of people were still running through the Duke's mind for a long time. And unable to cope with it himself, he called his faithful advisor Oslo. Already staying in the Wangler house, Leonia sat at the table and looked at the abundance of delicious food at the table in front of the girl. Leonia was not sure she could eat it all, which she warned her older relatives about. The Countess said that the girl had suffered so much in her still so short life that she needed to eat more to regain her strength. Leonia thought that if she could eat it all, the relatives would have to roll her out of the room. Her grandfather told the little girl that while she was here, she could rest easy at the Wangler Manor. The girl's bedroom was being renovated for now, but the old man assured her that it wouldn't take long. He said that if the girl needed anything, she could just let her older relatives or servants know. Leonia thought it was very nice to have people who would take care of you. Count Wangler said he would introduce the girl to her uncles later and they were about her age. At the same time, two young boys were peeking through the ajar door to the dining room. One of them asked if it was their niece, the other as red-haired as the girl. Said that he thought the girl's name was Leonia or something like that. He also said that this girl had been through a lot and would need to be well taken care of. The first guy said he hoped the girl would like their gift. The red-haired boy tried to force something to stay still in his hands and told the second one, Ian, to help. At that moment, Count Wangler heard some noise outside the door and asked his wife what it could have been. Suddenly, the dining room door swung open and a cute little furry animal flew into the room, followed by two boys running after it. The animal immediately flew over to Leonia, and she readily caught it in her arms. The girl was a little surprised, but with a smile thought that this is what it is. Mom's family with us. The girl looked at her hands, where some animal was sitting cheerfully and peacefully. Count Wangler looked in surprise at the open door of the dining room, and the two boys standing there and asked what the two had done again. He replied that they just wanted to give Leonia a little gift and the other. The redhead said that they wanted to stop by and say hello to their lovely niece. The older boy was the first to approach the girl and said that his name was Jan Wangler and he was her uncle. The girl said she was very happy to meet Uncle Jan. Then the second boy introduced himself. His name was Tobias and he was Jan's cousin, but he was still Leonia's uncle. Jan asked the girl if she liked the gift. The boy explained that the animal that was now sitting in the little girl's arms was called a sugar marsupial, and it was extremely popular now among the children of aristocrats. Leonia looked at her hands, where the little animal was curled up in a lump and sleeping. The girl thought that to be more precise. She was neither a child nor an aristocrat, but something so small and fragile evokes pity rather than sympathy. Countess Wangler intervened in the conversation. She asked if the boys could not see that Leonia was still eating. The girl said it was all right, and she was full. She told her uncles that the present was very nice, but that the tiny creature was so small that she even felt sorry for it. Pleased by her words, Count Wangler said that his little granddaughter has a very kind heart, and she cares so much about this animal. He said that the girl was right, and this poor creature seemed too weak. Jan and Tobias looked at each other and immediately decided that Leonia needed something big and strong. These words gave the girl a strange bad feeling. Gwyden himself came to the dungeon, where the newly made Duchess Heidegger had been thrown, and, approaching the right grate, asked how his beloved was doing and whether she needed anything. The woman said that she had had enough of this spectacle, for Duke Heidegger knew perfectly well why she was here. Gwyden frowned and remembered the conversation he had with his men after the Wangler family had left. Gwyden sat in his office and looked at the people Oslo had introduced to him. They were an alchemist and an artist who were examining his study. Getting straight to the point, the young duke asked what the problem was. The artist then replied that he guessed that the material used to dye the fabric of the chair the duke sat on all the time was one of those no longer in use due to its great toxicity. The duke remembered that this chair had been commissioned by Magda on their anniversary, and then realized that his constant headaches were also part of Magda's plan. The artist and alchemist were certain that Duke could resist the toxins due to his unique swordmaster physiology, but he would only be able to fully recover after taking the antidote. After digesting all this information, Duke Heidegger ordered Oslo, the artist and the alchemist, to also examine the bedroom, know every inch of the estate, and change all the furniture that had been bought during those 8 years. It was then that the Duke realized that all those 8 years, Magda had only been around to kill him. If his daughter hadn't told him about the paint, then the Duke would have continued living in the poison without even realizing it. When Leonia said that she had prepared a gift for her father, he thought that the girl would throw a tantrum and scandal to make a fool of him. But how wrong he was. In prison, Gwyden asked Magda why she had done all this, because he thought they would share the pain of losing Eliza together, which had become their common pain. The woman said that she had had enough and that the Duke should stop feeling sorry for himself because it was disgusting. He's still saying he lost her, but everyone knows he just left her. Clinging to the bars, the man said that it wasn't true and he hadn't even thought of leaving Elise. Magda asked him not to lie to himself, since all he was doing was drowning in self-pity over being forced into the marriage. She asked if Gwyden had ever comforted her sister. He asked Eliza to wait for him, but he himself didn't even apologize to her. Duke Heidegger said it was a huge misunderstanding, and until it was resolved, he was under house arrest, being watched all the time. Magda said that if he thought the woman would believe such words, he thought she was a fool, because a sword master can't just be put under house arrest. He made his own choice, preferring wealth and status, and using the emperor and his parents as a convenient excuse to justify his actions. Magda said that he was the one who had ruined Paula in the end, because he had lived his whole life groveling before authority and taking out his resentment on the Wangler girl. In all those years of feeling sorry for himself, he had thought of nothing better than to come to Magda. She said Duke Heidegger was just a coward. He didn't even know what Elise had been feeling all this time. She had tried to kill herself in every way possible, and their mother had sobbed over her day and night until it undermined the woman's health. The day their mother and Eliza went to the convent for rehabilitation, the father of their family was in the carriage with them, and there was an accident and Magda lost them all. She refused to go with them at the time because she was so upset, but the Duke has no idea how agonizing that is. Duke asked if that was the reason she dressed Sharon like that. Magda said of course it was because of that, because it would mean that she would be able to see with her own eyes how he would suffer over the death of his daughter. The woman said she was sorry it had to end this way, for she had hoped to destroy the entire Heidegger household after becoming his wife. After a little thought, Gwyden said he would let her have their child. Magda started screaming and saying that she would end his vile offspring right here and now and kill them all. Waiting for the exit of the prison, Duke Heidegger ordered the guards to make sure the Duchess did not hurt herself. Back at the mansion, Gwyden realized he hadn't thought about it at the funeral, but the Chamberlain had believed Leonia's words and Countess Michelson's so-called proof without reservation. The Chamberlain is the Emperor's own representative, and the fact that he showed such subjectivity must mean something. Appearing at the reception of His Majesty, the Emperor, Duke Heidegger immediately asked him one question: what deal he had made with his daughter Leonie. When Duke Heidegger arrived at the Emperor's reception, the first thing he asked His Majesty was what deal the Emperor had made with his daughter. The Emperor only grinned at this and said that he must be getting old, for he had never thought that he would ever see Gwyden Heidegger sweating with his own eyes. The Emperor said he didn't know that Duke Heidegger also had a second child, sharing in that unborn child, until he learned about it from Leonia. He said that Gwyden really hid them well all these years, but how could he not have guessed for so long that Paula was using the inheritance potion instead of medicine? Duke Heidegger had said that if he wanted her dead, he would have simply killed the woman, long ago, rather than prolonging her life with poison. The Emperor grinned and said that the Duke always does his job quickly and efficiently. Recently, Countess Michelson came to see him to ask to meet with Leonia. Of course, His Majesty was initially curious about what this snake-like woman was up to this time. But to his surprise, she told a very entertaining story. Count Heidegger's daughter had awakened her magical abilities. The Emperor said that, from what the Countess told him, the girl's ability was that through her paintings, Leonia could travel through time and space. This is indeed an incredible ability. According to the Countess, the girl was painting her memories from her mother's funeral and suddenly just got sucked into the painting. Of course, the Emperor has doubts. But after all, they are talking about Countess Michelson, and she will not divulge such information unless it is reliable. And then Duke Heidegger realized everything. Leonia knew in advance what would happen at the funeral, and that was why she had made such a statement. The Emperor said that he had heard that the Duke had been humiliated quite well at the funeral. Based on that, Leonia is a child to be reckoned with. All this time, there was a lion cub living under Gwyden's roof, and he didn't even realize it. But even with all of that, Leonia is still a child, so she's very much in need of affection. She only asked His Majesty to remove Magda, but not to touch her half-sister. The Emperor found this astonishing, for the girl simply looked into his eyes and told him not to touch her sister. Gwyden asked what the girl asked to provide in return with her magical ability. The Emperor hesitated, and after a few seconds said that it would already depend on what Gwyden would do next. The Emperor spoke, as if Leonia was not Duke Heidegger's daughter but his property. Gwyden said that he had heard that there was unrest on the Western Front. He promised to restore order there in a month. His Majesty said that would be very good, but the Duke should keep a close watch from now on, for the era of knights is slowly fading away. Now knights are being replaced by cannons and other powerful weapons. The Duke said that this was all true, but after all, people were still deciding what would be the target of the cannon. The Emperor agreed with this, but also said that he really wants to be in the hands of his daughter, Leonia. Just as the Heideggers possess the art of swordsmanship and the Wanglers have mystical powers, members of the royal family also possess a power. This power lies in the ability to read a person's mind and force them to obey by placing a hand on their head. The Emperor maintains a firm grip on Gwyden by empowering him, but the Emperor's powers are slowly fading. He said that the moment he lowered his gaze to Leonia, it reminded him of the days of his dawn. The girl's abilities gave the Emperor hope of returning to those wonderful days. And then Gwyden guessed that the Emperor was asking his daughter for a favor. The Emperor told the Duke that if he could show even the slightest interest in his daughter, he could bargain with the Emperor. Gwyden asked what he should do. With a chuckle, the Emperor rose from his throne and said that now Gwyden would regret that he had taken little interest in his daughter. Now the girl had already promised that she would marry whomever the Emperor chose, so until the girl's abilities were fully awakened, Gwyden had no right to touch Leonia. At Wangler Manor, Leonia sat in the garden drinking tea, thinking that perhaps at this very moment her father was hearing the truth from the Emperor. Countess Wangler asked her granddaughter if she liked the dessert. The girl said it was delicious and it would be nice if her grandfather would join them. Suddenly, the girl's gaze was caught by a lizard crawling from under the table. Both granddaughter and grandmother were shocked by it. But then a peacock appeared behind the girl's back, and both representatives of the family were finally confused about what was happening. Jan and Tobias appeared in the garden and tried to catch the animals. Countess Wangler immediately asked what the boys were making a fuss about and told them to get the animals out of here quickly. Jan said that they were their presents for Leonia, showing the girl the animals. Tobias said they were big and strong, but the girl told her uncles that something cute, fluffy, and with 4 legs would suit her better, hinting at a cat or a dog. The boys thought for a second, and then rushed away, shouting that they understood everything, and now they would definitely bring something the girl would like. The girl sank tiredly back down at the table and thought that if she was serious about fighting Gaiden and the Emperor, she had to do something about this house of happiness first. Drawing in her room, Leonia thought about what she had said to the Emperor, as if her powers had not yet fully awakened. But in fact, she had long ago perfected them. It's more than just traveling through space and time. However, for now it's best to hide all the cards, because the girl doesn't want anyone to know what she's really capable of yet. Also, she can't let the Wangler house be destroyed again. Even with her powers, Leonia is still a child, so she'll need people to protect her. The Emperor wants to use her as a political tool. House Heidegger and House Wangler joined together primarily because the Emperor wanted a son to be born to a swordmaster and a sorceress. The Emperor is the one at the root of all misfortune. One girl won't be able to defeat him. Oslo always follows Gaidon's orders perfectly, and if only Lenoia could get him on her side, all would be well. Suddenly there was a knock on the door, breaking the girl out of her thoughts. It was her uncles, and she wondered what they had come up with this time. The boys entered the room and handed Leonia a lion cub. Jan said that it was still small, and so it could only drink milk. The girl was surprised that the uncles called the lion cub a baby, for one of its paws was bigger than her face. She wondered whether to accept the gift or not, and John began to tell her that the baby had been born on a ship that had carried it across the sea. The ship's staff said that the lion cub's mother had died in childbirth. The girl took the animal in her arms and thought that she felt sorry for him because he, just like Leonia herself, was left without a mother. Suddenly the door to the room swings open, and on the threshold stands the angry Count Wangler, shouting at the boys that they are scoundrels, and how they only thought of giving such an animal to his tender granddaughter. He wanted to say something else, but Leonia hugged the lion cub and said that it was cute. The Count's anger immediately changed to mercy, and he said with a chuckle that the boys, as always, had outdone themselves because it was logical that Leonia's pet should be a lion. He asked his granddaughter if she had thought of a name for the animal. The girl said that since he was a lion cub, he would be called Roshan. Grandpa said that was a very good name. A maid suddenly came in the door of the room and said that Miss Leonia's bedroom was ready. The joyful grandfather took the girl by the hand and led her to look at the new room. The girl didn't understand why she was so anxious. After all, it was just her room. The girl was blindfolded and led up to the room. She didn't expect such a trivial thing to be made into a real opening ceremony. When the girl reached the door, her grandfather said he hoped she would enjoy it, and swinging open the bedroom door, told the girl to remove her blindfold. A large and spacious room, in shades of pink, appeared before Leonia's eyes. The servants were congratulating her, but the girl thought to herself that a child would definitely be thrilled with such a thing. But in her previous life, she had been a 32-year-old woman. Her grandfather told her to look up at the ceiling, and it turned out to be a very beautifully painted picture. Count Wangler said that since the girl liked painting so much, they hired Michelangelo to paint the ceiling especially for her. The girl was shocked that she had hired the very same Michelangelo, who was the main contractor of the church and the greatest artist of his time. Leonia couldn't believe that such a famous and serious artist was hired to just paint a little girl's room. Countess Wangler came up to Leonia and told her that if her granddaughter didn't like something, they would change it the second it was done. The girl was shocked by such a gift. The Count and Countess didn't understand why she didn't say anything about it. Leonia thought that before she came back, she was too fixated on getting Gaidon's approval. She hadn't thought about visiting her family on her mother's side, but really, everything she'd ever looked for all the time was here. It was just like chasing the bluebird that waited at home all the time. How could she not have realized that before? Tears started to come to the girl's eyes, and she immediately hugged her grandmother. She said that she had never received such gifts in her life, and sincerely thanked her relatives for it. In the dining room at dinner, Leonia had something to say to her grandfather. Tobias intervened in the conversation and said that if Leonia needed anything, all she had to do was ask and her favorite uncle would immediately bring her guidance head. Count Wangler said that was a wonderful idea, but the girl said she didn't need her father's head, especially since it sounded a bit rude, and probably impossible. The girl said that the thing is that the Imperial Academy she went to all this time offered to hold an exhibition of her work, but the girl's father turned it down. However, her grandfather was now her guardian, so she figured it wouldn't be too late to agree. Without even listening to the end, Count Wangler jumped up from the table and said that he would immediately go to the principal's office and the girl should only wait a little while. The girl smiled and thought that since the exhibition would still take place, it was time to meet with Countess Stein. The girl made an appointment to meet the Countess in the garden of the Wangler Manor. When the Countess arrived, she said hello to the girl and told her that she had heard that the exhibition of the girl's work was going to take place after all, which meant that the girl's plan had begun to come to fruition. The girl said that it was time to show her magical abilities to the world. The Count and Countess Wangler watched the meeting of their granddaughter and Countess Stein from the window of one of the rooms. The Count asked his wife what their pretty granddaughter could be talking about with this woman. The Countess reassured her husband, saying that Leonia had held herself very well at the funeral, so she was sure the girl would do just fine on her own. Tobias and Roshan were eavesdropping on the conversation between Leonia and Countess Stein. The boy asked the lion cub in a whisper why that evil woman was talking to their little chicken. Roshan growled something, and Toby, deciding to ask him why he was dragging him around, tried to push the animal away. Countess Stein grinned at the bushes and said that the little girl was very much loved here, and it showed. Leonia put her hand on her head and said, bored, that she had to stop with the idle talk, because the Countess had come for a reason and clearly wanted to ask her for a favor. Countess Stein did not hide it and said that, as the girl knew, the Academy would soon have an exhibition of her works. The Countess gave the girl an envelope and said that she wanted Leonia to invite the person whose name was written here. The girl opened the envelope and, reading the name, asked why this person out of many others. The Countess said that this was the person she had been looking for so long. It would pose no harm to the girl, and this person could be a good guinea pig for her ability. The girl asked again if it was all true to cure that person. The Countess smiled and said that was the reason why she liked talking to smart people, because they would immediately understand what the conversation was going to be about. Leonia agreed and said that this way her funeral debt would be paid off. The Countess agreed and asked the girl to always stay in touch, adding that her doors were always open to the young miss. As the Countess left, the thought crossed Leonia's mind that back then, in her past life, it was the Countess, along with Oslo, who had tried to rescue her from prison. But Oslo had been killed. Had that cunning fox betrayed him, or had they both died because of their failure? But everything is fine now, so no matter what happens, all that's needed now is to use her to his advantage. Tobias, sitting in the bushes with Roshan, tensed up and wondered why he could now feel the array of an adult emanating from his little chick niece. But almost immediately the boy pulled himself together and thought that he was the adult here and couldn't let it get to him. At that moment, Leonia noticed movement in the bushes and asked how long Uncle Toby was going to hide in the bushes. This caused the boy to have to come out of his temporary hiding place. With lowered head, he asked how the girl knew about it, to which he received the answer that the bushes could not move by themselves, and of course she had noticed it. She invited her uncle to sit down and asked if he was worried about her. Toby replied that of course he was worried because the woman was evil. The girl said that even so, it was not proper for a gentleman to eavesdrop on a lady's conversations. The girl said with a smile that if Uncle Tobias told anyone about the conversation that had taken place between her and Countess Stein, he could never be a real gentleman. She said that in that case she would only offer him milk, as it was a child's drink. And actually, real gentlemen don't even put sugar in their coffee. Tobias took a mug of coffee and drank it in one gulp, saying that he, as a true gentleman, loved the taste of coffee, but thought it was so bitter that he could die. On the day of the exhibition, At the academy, fireworks and decorations of flowers greeted the guests at the entrance. The people who came to the exhibition were amazed at how big this exhibition was. It was obvious that the academy had spent a year's fee on it. Someone from the guests said that Count Wangler really adored his granddaughter. The girl watching the people thought that there were many more guests than she had expected. However, the person Countess Stein had come to ask for was still not there. Suddenly everyone's attention was drawn to a certain man. His appearance was a real furor, because after one incident he did not appear in society, and everyone wondered what could have brought him here. This man turned out to be the Marquis Karl Jasper. This was a man of immense influence. The entire economy and politics of the eastern region were under his influence. However, Marquis Jasper had been severely wounded in the Battle of Guli Mountain, one of the fiercest battles in the history of the empire, and the wound was still eating away at his flesh. Leonia approached the Marquis. After greeting him, said that she was glad to see him. She was honored to meet a man like Marquis Karl Jasper. Only once looking at the girl, the Marquis realized that something was wrong with her because a child cannot have such a look. He asked if she was Duke Gaidon's daughter, and the girl confirmed it. She held out her hand to the Marquis and said that she had prepared the painting especially for him. They came to that place, but no one saw the painting as such. There was only a staircase and a door in the ceiling at that place. Marquis didn't understand what was going on, but the girl said that this was the very thing she had written to him about, and he would only have to climb the stairs and open the door. The Marquis seemed angry and asked what kind of bullying was going on. Leonia said that the Marquis was obviously aware of the magical abilities of the House of Wangler, and wouldn't he be interested to know what her ability was? The girl said that they were waiting for the Marquis. Hearing that they were waiting, the Marquis wanted to ask what the girl was talking about, but immediately realized and said in disbelief that it couldn't be. Leonia explained that Wangler's ability could not be activated without the participants' consent, and asked if the Marquis didn't want to meet them. Looking up, the man said that if the ones the girl was talking about and the ones the Marquis was thinking of were the same people, then he agreed and wanted to see them. Taking hold of one rung of the ladder with his hand and placing his lower leg on the ladder, the Marquis began to climb up the ladder to meet his old friends. The second daughter of Marquis Jaspers persuaded her father to visit the exhibition of the daughter of Duke Heidegger, claiming that he would have an unforgettable experience. To give her words weight, the girl decided to give up her inheritance rights in case her father did not like the visit. This is exactly what the Marquis remembered. As he climbed the stairs, if the daughter was right, the man would go back 17 years to the time of the Battle of Mount Guli. 50,000 men stormed the heights of Guli, only 2,000 survived. This battle has remained in history as a symbol of tragedy. Marquis Charles was climbing a guard post to check the enemy's movements when a cannon struck the post from above and killed Marquis Charles' comrades. The days of pain he had endured since then were worse than death. And so the Marquis made it to the top of the stairs, and his still living comrades were in front of him, whom he immediately told to leave sooner rather than later. The Marquis really found himself in his young body. His comrades did not heed his warning the first time, thinking him delirious, and served him wine to relax him. Nor did they hear the second time, for they knew they were dead. All these people had died 17 years ago, and the Marquis had been sitting in his mansion all this time, even though he should have been living life to the fullest, not just for himself, but for them all. The comrades apologized to their friend for leaving first, but now it was really time for them to leave for the other side. They would wait there for the Marquis, but there was no need for the man to rush to them. Charles rushed to his friends in desperation, wanting to stop them, but they dissolved, wishing him a good life. The Marquis was once again in his own time, and in his hands was a painting where the dead battle comrades sat in a friendly circle. Next to it stood Leonia. She explained that she had not brought these people to life, but had shown what the Marquis desired most. It was only an illusion, but the feelings of these people were real. They even asked from the painting to bring Charles to them, for they had a special gift for an old friend. The Marquis kissed the little lady's hand and thanked her, promising never to forget what he had done. Later, a whole endless line of people lined up in front of Wangler Manor, eager to meet Leonia. It was not surprising, for the royal throne had announced the awakening of her powers. Marquis Charles himself offered to give the girl a mineral mine, but she refused, saying that the man gave her much more because thanks to him she lives in peace. Duke Wangler was even more enchanted by his granddaughter, who struck everyone down with her kind heart, and the resulting cue to Leonia threatened to paralyze the entire estate because of the endless greetings of guests. Leonia's father was tormented by the news that had reached him. This child had cured the Marquis Wound with her ability. If only the man had known of her awakening earlier, things would have turned out differently. Gwyden ordered Oslo to bring Sharon to him immediately. Sharon was openly hysterical, grabbing the hair of the unhappy servants, loudly proclaiming her hatred for everyone around her, and demanding her mother back. Her father, who wished her a good morning, was also hated at this moment. In a burst of emotion, she said that he didn't care about her or her unborn child, but quickly bit her tongue when she saw the man's sinister aura. The servants gestured for her not to say anything stupid right now. In the end, Sharon timidly apologized, and Gwyden only now noticed how nasty the girl was. He reprimanded the child for inappropriate behavior. After all, Heideggers don't make fools of themselves like she just did. At this point, the father was scaring his daughter. Gwyden, on the other hand, set his 10-year-old sister Leonia as an example to 7-year-old Sharon. He expected his youngest daughter to grow up to be a lady like her. The Duke ordered Leonia's former governess to now put all her heart into Shireen's upbringing. In doing so, he allowed the use of any methods, even violence, the main thing that the girl learned to behave like an aristocrat. Leonia read the letter. It said that Marquis Charles returned to the Eastern Lands and gave his title to his second daughter. With the remaining fortune, Lord Charles had set up a fund for people who had been injured during the war. He asked to be told that House Jaspers would fulfill anything that only Leonia asked. Leonia became convinced of Karl's reliability. As an ally, meanwhile, Duke Heidegger arrived at the estate to meet his daughter. He must have been anxious to get her back, especially after the royal banquet to celebrate the awakening of Leonia's powers. Duke Wangler was not happy about his guest and grumbled unhappily. Gwyden got out of the carriage, but his daughter rushed not to him, but to the servant Oslo and began to chirp merrily with him. Duke Heidegger was visibly shaken, but he kept silent. The man thanked his father-in-law for temporarily keeping his daughter and promised to pass the money for it through the counselor. Gwyden also wished to speak to Leonia in private. Duke Wangler, squeaking his heart, allowed it. When the daughter and father sat at the same table, Gwyden tried to communicate with her politely. However, Leonia was annoyed by this pretense and asked to speak in a normal tone. Before the awakening, the father had ordered the servants to get rid of Leonia. Now his conscience began to gnaw at him little by little, for she had awakened her powers after all. And yet the man could hardly bow his head because of his pathetic pride. To think that once Leonia had tried to win this man's favor. Gwyden spoke of his daughter's bargain with the Emperor, thanking him and Sharon for their mercy. But then he did not realize that he would pay for his actions for a long time to come. As a thank you, Leonia asked that Oslo be given to her, as she needed a competent counselor. And since Oslo was the only person who cared for the girl, he was the most suitable person. Leonia assured her father that neither Oslo nor certainly her would do anything to disappoint him. Tobias was outraged by the gifts from Duke Heidegger, or rather the presence of them. He ordered Roshen to tear them all to pieces. Oslo was a bit taken aback by this, but Leonia quickly led the man away. When the Duke announced Oslo's transition into Leonia's service, he realized that he had always been expendable to the Lord. Leonia looked at him with warmth. In the past, Oslo had sacrificed his life to rescue her from the dungeon. Now the man had sworn to serve the little lady faithfully and diligently. However, Leonia asked Oslo to be her teacher rather than her counselor. She asked him to teach them the Heideggerian self-control that Gwyden had praised so much. This place was very different from Heidegger Manor. Powerful and influential people should be able to be strict and even belligerent. However, House Wangler, who inherited their wealth from generation to generation, was still just as gentle, just like a flock of sheep. They knew that Leonia had helped Marquis Charles meet with his dead friends, but none of them had ever asked the girl to let them see Paula again. They are either very unconflicted or they feel guilty. House Wangler was in the spotlight now more than ever, but instead of getting revenge on Gwyden and Magda for the death of Leonia's mother, all they did was keep an eye on the child and just smile. Leonia wasn't trying to get them to take revenge on emotion. They just needed to show the world what would happen to anyone who tried to harm the Wangler household. Leonia wanted to protect this family. After all, the algae in Actinia must thrive for the clownfish to live comfortably. Tobias burst into the room. In a loud whisper, he told his niece to tell him if Oslo started threatening her. From behind, Jan suddenly loomed up and dragged his cousin away from the room. Leonia returned to the original topic. She wanted Oslo to be her right-hand man. The man needed to find suitable assistants to fulfill their orders, but make sure it didn't turn out to be Countess Stein's men. And in general, Oslo should not even go near that woman. Then Oslo reported that Magda had already given birth and was safe with the child. Then, when talking to her father, Leonia asked to give not only Oslo, but Magda as well. The Duke agreed to do so after the birth, only advising that nothing serious be done to her. Not to overdo it, as he put it. Presently, Leonia gave Oslo the letter and ordered it to be delivered to the chamberlain of the royal palace. The servant inquired as to the contents, and the lady replied. Oslo thought this was the most sensible thing to do. Leonia also ordered that a meeting with Magda be arranged for her as soon as possible. Oslo could arrange it all the very next day. Leonia appeared at the bars of Magda's dungeon, congratulating her on the birth of the child. She wondered aloud that Gwyden had allowed the torture of the mother of his child. There was a time when Leonia had hopes for Magda. Before Leonia's powers awakened, the Duke had not cared about his daughter and had let his wife do whatever she wanted to her. Magda trampled on her stepdaughter's paintings, mocking her. At the same time, as a model of aristocratic woman, put her daughter Shireen. Magda did everything to lower Leonia's self-esteem and make her think that she is nothing. Until it was revealed that Magda was feeding arsenic not only to Paula, but also to her stepdaughter and Shireen. To Leonia, the woman was the living embodiment of terror. It took Gwyden 2 years to realize what she had done. Enraged by her actions towards Sharon, in a fit of rage, the Duke had Magda hacked to death. That's how she died before Leonia returned. Even after Magda died, the girl suffered the effects of her stepmother's actions for years. All the arsenic that had accumulated over the years tormented Leonia for the rest of her life. The sound of Magda's laughter echoed in her stepdaughter's head, and her heart sank at the slightest giggle. Now Magda had a lot to answer for. The woman, in no mood to talk, tried to send Leonia away. But she had not come for conversation, but for retribution. Magda advised her to be compassionate and come back later just to watch the execution. But Leonia was of the opinion that compassion was for those who could afford it, and she had already lost too much in her life. Leonia didn't have an ounce of pity left, but she asked the emperor for Magda's pardon. Upon hearing this, the woman rejoiced wildly, but judging by the grim look on Leonia's face, she rejoiced too soon. Leonia regretted that Magda still wanted to live, even though she looked so determined. But the woman immediately changed her tone and begged the girl to let her raise her child, the young mistress's younger brother. Leonia refused, for the throne sympathized with Magda, but was not about to absolve her sins. They considered canceling the execution. This gave the woman hope. Now she begged to be with the child, at least until he grew out of infancy. Magda wanted to name him, but Gwyden beat her to it, naming the baby Nathan. The man hoped to make him a master swordsman, but Leonia knew that his father would not succeed. Nathan would grow up to resemble Magda's personal guard. The woman tried to beg for mercy for her child, but Sharon was also her daughter, but she had done terrible things to her. Magda thought that Leonia had spared her stepmother, but in reality the girl had left her life only for the woman to witness her son's life falling apart. That was the gift. The next day, the royal throne finally announced its decision on Magda's case. On considering the application of Leonia Heidegger and Duke Dieter Wengler, the royal throne, in the name of His Divine Majesty, the Emperor hereby sentenced Magda Lichter to life imprisonment. To most of the citizens, this news was seen as a compassionate act of the House of Wengler. To the nobility, however, it was a completely different story. Rumor had it that Leonia had ordered Magda to be taken to a dye factory. The toxins in the factory would lead to a slow, agonizing death. She was denied the mercy of a clean and quick death. High society felt that the loss of one made the Wanglers fierce. Seeing her new home, Magda begged for a quick death. Tobias wanted to take Roshan with him to the royal banquet, but John refused him. Tobias even dressed up as a lion cub for the occasion. He thought that if they accompanied his niece with such a lion cub, it would look amazing. However, Jan threatened to tell Leonia that Jan was a child who couldn't even drink coffee. At this point, the matter was closed. Finally, Leonia herself came out to them. This time, she straightened her hair and the whole family came out in admiration. There would be aristocrats and royalty at the banquet. Leonia's ex-husband will also be there. He is a prince after all. The grandfather, seeing that his granddaughter was a little nervous, calmed her down and told her to enjoy the banquet. Oslo once talked about things coming by themselves too. The last officially registered wizard had awakened 97 years ago. Many people never thought they would live to see the awakening of a new wizard. The footman announced Lord Charles and Lady Marquise Diana Jaspers who had arrived. Now everyone could see with their own eyes that the man's wound was gone. Then the might of the royal throne and the pride of the empire, Leonia Heidegger, appeared at the banquet. She was immediately surrounded by aristocrats, wanting to attract the attention of the young mistress. Finally, the royal couple entered the hall. Behind the emperor came the prince, Leonia's first husband, whom she missed very much. Leonia's first husband, Isaac Okestrov, entered the hall. Before his resignation, the emperor constantly questioned Gaiden whether his eldest daughter had awakened magical abilities. The duke, realizing the intentions of his majesty, proposed marriage because Leonia could pass on both magical abilities and the possibility of becoming a master of the sword. So Isaac and Leonia were married. Although he was the firstborn son, his mother's bloodline was destroyed, rendering him powerless among the royal family. However, he inherited the lordship, which made him an ideal candidate in the eyes of the emperor. The emperor hoped that his son would give him a strong grandson from this union. However, Leonia was only 15, and Isaac wanted nothing to do with her, so he became an older brother to her. He told his young wife that during the struggle for the throne he would be killed first as the weakest link. He hoped that Leonia would meet someone good afterward and live happily with him. As such, they never became fully married. Isaac was murdered exactly 1 year after their wedding. The emperor made a long speech about the fact that for the first time in 100 years a magician had awakened under his command, and therefore he could look his predecessors in the face without shame. Leonia was tired of listening to him, and turned her gaze to Isaac. He must be 18 now, and sitting next to him was Princess Calabria, who was now 12. In the past, she had been the one who had told Leonia that there was a distinctive, disgusting odor coming from those who aspired to power. Their fathers stank worst of all. Now Leonia had escaped the stinking powermonger, and that brought her considerable relief. She hoped she could be friends with Calabria and Isaac this time as well. Finally, the official speech ended with Leonia being recognized as a mage. The crown granted her the royal seal and the privileges of immunity. The hall erupted in applause. Leonia finally made her way to her family. She had no idea that the appointment ceremony could have been so excruciatingly long. As she approached her relatives, she asked Tobias to escort her to the restroom. Hand in hand, they moved down the corridors. As they walked, Leonia thought of the 8th Prince Rutger, who had not even shown up at the banquet. But he, even if he wanted to, probably couldn't go. 8th in line was no better than a bastard in the line of succession. Suddenly Leonia noticed Isaac sitting, and asking Tobias to wait, walked over to him. She greeted him and joined him, sitting down next to him on a bench nearby with the prince's permission. Isaac congratulated Leonia on her appointment and apologized for not doing so sooner. However, the young mistress was not in a particularly festive mood either. When asked to explain, Leonia asked Isaac if he himself was happy about becoming crown prince. The prince preferred not to talk about it. Leonia apologized for causing offense, but Isaac immediately tried to cut her off otherwise. He still remained as soft as any child in the neighborhood. Unfortunately, Leonia had to take advantage of this weakness to ask him something. Leonia asked the prince and his sister Calabria to attend a tea party that Duke Wangler was going to throw for his granddaughter. Isaac tried to refuse, citing that he could not decide such matters. Leonia, on the other hand, pressed that the emperor had promised to honor any requests she made. Thus, the prince was left with no choice, and the young Mrs. Heidegger made her way to her uncle Tobias. She knew for sure that Isaac would come. He had too good a heart to refuse the child's invitation. Tobias, as soon as his niece approached him, began to ask her what exactly she was talking to the prince about. From behind the bushes they were watched by the 8th prince, who admired Leonia. The matter with Isaac was finished. Now Leonia only had to find Calabria. Tobias was very unhappy when his niece talked to the prince for an hour. He had pestered Leonia for far too long. Finally, the princess was found sipping juice in large quantities. It was as if she was destined to become an alcoholic. Leonia approached the princess. She immediately tried to rudely send the girl away, but she was not offended. Leonia as if casually said that she was tired of the stench that came from the powermongers. This caught Calabria's attention, and she looked at her interestedly, agreeing with those words. They both just chuckled. Calabria never thought she would hear such a thing from Heidegger. Leonia countered that inside she is a Wangler who are known for their kindness and recklessness, except that this family needs guidance. The princess suggested that this person could be Leonia, but the latter shook her head. She couldn't even keep her mother from being poisoned. What leadership? Calabria looked at her and said seriously, "Leonia is a child. She shouldn't be ashamed of the actions of adults." The princess in this life remained still as straightforward. She always scolded Leonia if she said something derogatory. In the past, when Leonia got pregnant, Calabria had set her up to fight. If she were her mother, she would have forced the girl to divorce that bastard already, even if she had to tear her hair out. One couldn't hope to avoid the rain by staying alive under a rain cloud. The princess had helped Leonia realize what she had to do, and she had tried her best to protect her child, however. It was too late. But this time, Leonia would protect Calabria. She wanted to be friends with her happily, and this time for a long time. Now, Leonia invited the princess to the tea party as well. The latter agreed if she had time. Young Mrs. Heidegger threatened that if the princess did not come, she would come to her herself. Calabria angrily called the girl very clingy. Chaos reigned on the day of the tea party. Leonia was approached by little Arthur Gould, who admired the peacocks. 16 years later, this child would become famous for the biggest real estate scandal in the history of the empire. Unfortunately, Leonia knew him all too well. But now the boy really wanted his parents to buy him a peacock too. Leonia advised him to lie on the floor and throw a tantrum if he was refused. Arthur immediately followed the girl's words. Finally, the prince and the princess arrived at the tea party. However, they did not arrive alone, but together with the 8th Prince Rutger. Leonia froze with surprise. She did not think that she would meet her third husband like this. Rutger Oekestroff was born a maid. Unlike the other royal offspring, ashamed of the prince's lineage, the royal throne executed Rutger's mother as soon as he was born. The crown almost rejected him, as he lived in an empty wing of the royal castle. Only Isaac and Calabria had no animosity towards him. He only came out of the shadows because the emperor so wished to escalate the struggle for the throne. Despite his origins, Rutger was undoubtedly gifted, and his involvement had caused everyone else to worry. And yet now the prince was so young and frail, his hair darker than Isaac's. It was said that darker hair symbolized a stronger lordship. But Rutger had not had time to awaken his ability, and so he was ridiculed for only having royal hair. They had no idea that Rutger would eventually emerge victorious from this battle. Now they introduced themselves to each other. Rutger asked Leonia to call him by his first name, for which he was reprimanded by Calabria. After that, the princess asked to show them the garden. Leonia left Rutger in the care of Uncle Jan before leading them away. Leonia was finally going to tell the reason why she had called the prince and princess, but before she called them to join her on a little trip into the picture, Leonia clearly realized that the two royal offspring had definitely sent someone to follow them, so she brought them into the picture where their conversation was fully private. And the conversation they were about to have was a very serious one, not for the ears to hear. Leonia told her brother and sister about her dream, born after the awakening of her abilities. As we know, House Heidegger supported the theory that in order to gain power, one must act aggressively. Since that was the case, the royal throne would always be occupied by people full of that very aggression. Although Isaac thought this idea seemed very naive, because those who ruled could not be innocent, he did not interrupt. Leonia wanted to put a benevolent emperor on the throne, crown Prince Isaac. Such serious words could no longer be written off as a silly childish joke. Isaac advised the sorceress to be careful what she said, but stopped himself. Leonia voiced the thought that if power ruled this world, then having enough power, it was possible to renegotiate what actions could and could not happen. Right now, Mrs. Heidegger had the power, and the world she wanted to build in the future was an impossibly perfect empire under the rule of a good ruler. Now the emperor wants to move into the past using Leonia's powers. Her abilities allowed it because since she could move in space, she could move in time too. But His Majesty wanted to go back and start again, to act more cunningly, to add cruelty. But Emperor Leonia was ready to take over. Isaac objected, as His Majesty was a difficult opponent. Even the crown prince could not help here. However, the man was still under the impression, and he also thought that Leonia's strength had not fully awakened. Thus, she was buying them time. Isaac was faced with the task of gaining as much support as possible to strengthen his strength. The Vanglers of Midland and Jasper from the east would help the crown prince. The south, north, and even the west should join soon. Calabria had no idea how such a thing was even possible. Leonia's answer was simple. Only she truly knew what her forces were capable of. The royal offspring began to point out to Leonia that they could easily take and tell everything out of the picture, for power is not characterized by honesty, and since the young mistress had opened up to them, she trusted them unconditionally. Leonia parried that if she had doubted them, she would have simply locked them in the painting. The words of a rather creepy person, but she was half Heidegger after all. Isaac looked at the sorceress, and it occurred to him that her name really does fit the lion. An aura of knowledge emanated from Leonia, that she ruled alone. Isaac had lived his whole life in despair at his inability to change anything on his own, but if he joined Leonia, maybe the prince would no longer be powerless. Leonia was extremely pleased with the tea party that had taken place. She and the prince and princess returned on time, and no one caught them. The royal offspring were probably already in the garden. So it was time for Leonia to go about her business, but suddenly Prince Rutger blocked her way. Leonia thought the prince was lost, and Uncle Jan had done a bad job, but according to Rutger, the boy had deliberately cut him loose. The prince had come to her to ask why she was avoiding him. After all, he too was a member of the royal family, though only half. Rutger wanted to be with them, to survive. Leonia concluded that it wasn't her he wanted, but her power. The prince had known all along what it was like to be abandoned, and he had abandoned Leonia and her child once anyway. But why? There was no answer to that question. So now Leonia rejected Rutger, advising him to seek allies with real power. And if he wanted loyalty as well, he would have to look for a good reason. And if it did not suit Leonia, the mistress would prefer that the prince not seek her out any longer. After these words, the enchantress left. Leonia realized that Rutger was just a child now and knew nothing, but his face reminded her of the past. It was better not to see him at all. Suddenly Leonia had the thought that Rutger might have seen them leave the painting, but she reassured herself that even if he had, he would keep his mouth shut. He never started a conversation with Leonia or anyone else, only spoke when the conversation was already in progress or he was forced to. He was terribly silent, even when they shared a bed. Leonia's conjugal nights with Rutger always passed in a silence that was difficult for the girl. These nights were forced and religious. Leonia was relieved when she soon became pregnant, for she could not stand those night sessions. Their conversation with the prince today was the longest they would have before the power awakened. The day was coming to an end. The tea party had been rather heavy, but before going to bed, Leonia's thoughts returned to the eighth prince. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen before she woke up. His face then, it was as if Rutger was in despair. But Leonia wrote it off as extreme surprise. It wasn't every day you saw a man dragged into a painting. She wondered if this man loved her at all. Did he even feel sorry for her? Looking back, Leonia was embarrassed to admit that she had fallen in love with Prince Rutger at first sight. When their wedding was announced, all the noble daughters of the empire were outraged. Leonia had already been divorced twice at that point, and she was old enough. This caused gossip, even though all these maidens were already unlikely to become the prince's wife. And shortly before the talks about the marriage agreement began, Rutger began to show his latent potential as a leader. The discarded pawn of the royal family began to defeat his siblings one by one, and stepped out of the shadows to confront the most powerful third prince as an equal. The third prince, Max Akestroff, was furious and in his mind. He eventually matured a plan to force the abusive marriage of Rutger to Leonia. The girl should have known her place, but emotions are rarely subject to reason. For the first time in her life, she fell in love the moment she saw Rutger. Leonia tiptoed around him everywhere just to see him, just as she had followed Gaiden as a child. Thus began again a life of endless longing. She tried to reach out to him, to speak to him, but Rutger remained as silent and different. Now Leonia wondered how he had lived when his wife had disappeared. Had he taken Sharon as his new wife? Had he had children with her? Leonia decided to stop wondering, for she could see for herself. She took the painting and moved with it. In front of her, Leonia suddenly saw her dress on a mannequin to which an altar had been erected. Nearby stood the Emperor's favorite desk. It turned out to be the Emperor's chambers. Suddenly, the man pulled back the canopy of the bed. Rutger could not believe his eyes. Before him stood a confused Leonia. The amazed Rutger could not believe his eyes. Leonia was standing in front of him, only in the form of a child. The girl began to falter, and then rushed back to her dress, but the man followed her. In an effort to stop the fugitive, Rutger grabbed her by the hem of her robe. He desperately wanted to tell Leonia that he knew she had returned and had been waiting for this all along. At their fussing and shouting, the palace guards came into the bedroom to protect the king. Leonia, on the other hand, got a head start and finally got to her dress. Rutger was left with only his robe and the question that tormented him. What had become of their child? In a panic, Leonia tore up the painting and wrapped herself in a blanket, nervously assuring herself that Rutger could not come to her now. She hadn't authorized it, so it must be all right. But Leonia was still shaking with fear. But why would Rutger do this? Leonia remembered his words about their child. The girl burst into tears. She would have to wait a long time for the moment when she would be able to meet her firstborn again, and finally see the unborn baby. Leonia went out into the hallway, in search of her grandmother. At her loud crying, her grandparents came out, to whom she ran and ran in with hugs. They, thinking the child was having a nightmare, laid her between them on the bed. Grandmother quietly wished her airy, cotton candy-like dreams and told her that her guardian angels would always protect Leonia. The next day, the Duke summoned a physician for his granddaughter. He stated that she was simply frightened and prescribed a mild sedative. But Duke Wangler was not satisfied with this. He ordered a more thorough search, although the healer had no idea what this man still wanted from him. The Duchess ordered them to be quiet, but eventually kicked the men out of the bedroom altogether. During the meal, more delicious dishes were placed on the table for Leonia's recovery. Tobias tried to tease his niece about sleepwalking and calling for her grandmother, but the Duchess told him off for it. Uncle John advised Leonia to ignore it and eat a good meal. At this moment, she fully felt that the best blessing was to have a loving family. Leonia received word from Calabria. She wrote that Mr. Melstein had given her his new invention, the gas lantern, and a bunch of other interesting jewelry had appeared. On the pretext of looking at all these curiosities, the princess invited Leonia to visit her. At the end, however, Calabria mentioned Rutger. He said that he would be looking forward to Leonia, which now brought the soul of the sorceress into confusion. Of course, Leonia wanted to see the princess, but there were more important things to do. Aidbedan had already been on the Western Front for some time. They couldn't hold out against him for long. They were just about to break free from the Emperor's iron control, the perfect time to take the West. Leone was told that Assistant Oslo was going over the tax payments with Mr. Yang. She moved towards her uncle's office where she became an unwitting witness to their conversation. The situation with the tax payments was that the service charge paid to the ports was quite substantial. But if one looked at the actual receipt of payment provided by the Baron, they were drastically different from each other. This had most likely been going on for quite some time, and in this case, punishment was inevitable. The Baron was the nephew of Duke Wangler and was an influential figure among the Emperor's vassals. This problem could easily be solved by using the Duke's name, but that would immediately undermine Yang's dignity as his successor. As they were thinking of a solution, Oslo started talking about thistles. More specifically, that there was only one way to grab this plant without hurting himself: to squeeze it very tightly. Sure, the Baron could even lose his title for years of deceit, but Oslo would do something subtler. He would confiscate his lands and property and take one of his children into his care. Exactly which one of the children Jan was referring to, Jan understood perfectly well. According to Leonia's estimation, the operation training the Wanglers was going well. It was then that John noticed his niece. Leonia approached and asked to borrow Oslo for a few minutes. Her uncle let her go with the caveat that her niece should have spoken more respectfully about their teacher. Walking down the corridor, Oslo and Leonia discussed the situation in the west. Lord Gaiden continued to press hard on their defenses, but it wouldn't last long. Leonia ordered her letter to be sent to the head of the Western rebel forces, namely Marie Poi Weiber, the leader of the Western Rebellion. Duchess Weiber was wise and talented, but unfortunately her sons were not. Their illegal dealings with the rebels behind Duchess Weiber's back provoked a war. The Emperor decided to use her son's crimes as an excuse to remove the Duchess from power and seize power in the West in her absence. Words cannot describe the woman's despair at that moment. Her children's crime of smuggling had become treason in the blink of an eye. Leonia allowed the letter to be read. If Oslo doubted its reasonableness, and she also ordered that the Alchemists' Union be contacted to find the man nicknamed Wolfgang's Peace. When Leonia left, announcing her trip to the palace tomorrow, Oslo opened the letter. There were tactics to get Lord Gaiden to withdraw his troops at the right time, and a petition for a place where sheep turned black, whatever that meant. The next afternoon, Leonia arrived for an audience with the Emperor. She wanted to hear the man's opinion of the painting. It depicted Gaiden. Leonia told the Emperor that she had painted the picture out of concern for the health of her father, who was now fighting rebels in the West. The royal chamberlain remarked that these were signs of the Western Plague, which was showing up quite regularly. The Emperor grew serious and wanted to read to Leonia. His ability was to control people's minds through reading, but it had weakened with age. Therefore Leonia, without fear, allowed the Emperor to use the ability on himself. The man ended up seeing only that she had a pure, even flawless heart. He ordered a hawk to be sent to Gaiden. The message was to convey that Duchess Mary would soon surrender, and Duke Gaiden should retreat and return to the capital with his army. Leonia was pleased. Everything was going according to plan, and she even had time to meet her dear Calabria. But suddenly she heard the sound of clapping, and when she turned in that direction she saw Rutger, who was now being beaten. Rutger was beaten by the furious lady because he had dared to touch her flowers. She raised her hand to strike again, but Leonia stood in front of her. The girl who hit Rutger was Barbara Orr, the wife of Viscount Dominique, the current mistress of the second prince. Before the awakening, shortly after the wedding, Leonie had been imprisoned because of the 4 viscounts, and what Isaac had to go through to free her. Leonia, in a fit of anger, said that Barbara could fornicate all she wanted, but it seems she also wanted to be known as stupid. This naturally made her mad, and all she had to do was let herself be hit once. But suddenly the blow that was meant for Leonia was taken by Rutger, who blocked her. Leonia, seeing this, ran up to Barbara and bit her. She shrieked and threw the girl away from her. The king's chamberlain came to the screams. Leonia immediately cried, saying that Barbara had struck her. Barbara screamed that she was the one who had been bitten here. Mrs. Orr did not agree with the chamberlain's words that the bite was a minor injury, for if it left a scar, the second prince would not take it so easily. The second prince, Richard O'Keestraw, had lost his arm 11 years ago during the war between the Wanglers and the Heidiggers. He was the most projected heir to the throne, and his bitterness over his lost arm has only grown stronger over the years. The prince certainly wouldn't take it lightly. Leonie ordered a carriage to be prepared as she wanted to go home. Barbara, who was unwilling to let her go so easily, was barely restrained by the maids. In the carriage, Leonie inquired about Rutger's condition. He replied that he was fine, but that the bruise on his chin was from last time. It was clear that this had happened to him more than once or twice. All this bullying had affected his pronunciation, which was a bit wrong even as an adult. Leona had every right to despise Rutger, but she had no thoughts of doing that to him. If she wanted to hurt him, at least she would have waited until he was older. It didn't fit in Leonia's mind how anyone could do that to a child. Rutger took the girl's frown personally and lowered his head guiltily. Leonia, noticing this, immediately explained that she was not upset with him and promised to take care of the prince's chin as soon as they arrived at the manor. Rutger feared that if they knew the prince was leaving the palace, he might be killed, but Leonia had thought of everything. She wouldn't have made a scene if she hadn't considered all the possible consequences. Then, blushing, Rutger gave Leonia the flower he had picked in the greenhouse. It reminded the prince of Leonia. It turned out that this whole mess was because of the flower. Rutger had been so dry before he woke up. Leonia didn't know he had the guts to do such a thing. Perhaps if his childhood had not been so traumatic, Rutger might have shown her such kindness. They had both been through a lot. Rutger, on the other hand, looked at Leonia and thought that no one had rushed to help him before. The prince's heart was ready to explode, but the boy tried not to show it, so as not to push Leonia away from him. The Wangler family was shocked by Leonia and Rutger's shabby appearance. It instantly made the Duke furious. Whoever dared to touch his granddaughter would be in trouble. The Duchess sat down opposite Leonia and asked her to tell her in detail what had happened. The rest of the family was outraged. Tobias was going to take Roshan and beat all the offenders. The Duke ordered to bring a doctor immediately. According to the doctor's report, Leonia was fine, but the same could not be said for the young lord. His jaw would take some time to heal, and his internal injuries were likely to be even worse. Internal bleeding in the abdomen, contusions, and there could be a hernia as well. It's like he's been physically abused for a very long time. The Duchess couldn't imagine who could abuse a small child like that and put her arm around him. The Duke was about to write a complaint to the crown, but was stopped by his son, saying that a frontal attack would only work when the Wangler family was all set. This conflict affects more than just the Viscountess. Sooner or later, the second prince will definitely intervene, and it will eventually turn into a power clash between Prince Richard and House Wangler. Then the Emperor will intervene, and they will have no choice but to yield to the royal family. Here Oslo has provided very timely information that should help crush Viscountess, or... Of course it was actually prepared by Leonia. Oslo had no idea how she did it, so he had to lie that this information was provided by House Heidegger under the condition of how this information would be used. The Duke found it outrageous that Gaiden was even making intelligence deals with his own daughter. However, Ian remarked, although it was overstepping its bounds, House Wangler must also reach this level of intelligence if it wanted to defend itself. They couldn't rely on Heidegger forever. Dignity could only be possessed by those aristocrats who had the corresponding power. House Wangler could not hope to survive if they continued to rely on Oslo, who was supplying them with information like a mother bird. It's time to become stronger. That was Ian's opinion, and his father heard him, inviting him to discuss it later in the study with him in Oslo. Leonia cheered. If they stuck to this path, House Wangler would acquire intelligence services in no time. The Duchess, meanwhile, turned to the prince and promised to alert the palace so that Rutger could stay with Wangler until his wounds healed. The prince was given a room next to Leonia, much to the boy's delight. The second prince became furious. The Wanglers asked for a motion. The Empress, Richard's mother, encouraged him to seize the moment to destroy forever the arrogant Wangler family who had taken her son's hand away. Rutger had been fitted with special plates, but Leonia wanted to give him even bigger and uglier braces. The doctor objected because it was the only thing that could be obtained in the near future, but the lady was adamant. Leonia also ordered Oslo to take care of Rutger's training, for the petition was a couple of days away. The prince was pleasantly surprised that he would finally be studying. Oslo explained to Rutger what the testimony was all about. The prince was not to look like a poor victim. Oslo asked Rutger to relax his eyebrows, then praised him and warned him that they would repeat the testimony after dinner. At the table, the Duchess advised His Highness to eat better to get back to normal faster, and prompted him with the names of dishes. Leonia looked at this with an impenetrable gaze. On the one hand, she felt sorry for Rutger, but on the other hand, she was still uncomfortable living under the same roof as him. Tobias interpreted Leonia's gloomy look as her granddaughter's jealousy of her grandmother, but the niece did not explain that this was not the case, for she saw no point. The servant reported to Leonia that they had tracked down the maids who had been in the greenhouse at the time of that incident. The maids and their families were safe in an isolated location under the protection of the Wanglers. Leonia noted that the new assistant was proving to be quite worthy. The man continued his report. Neither Prince Richard nor House Westlow had attempted to contact them. House Wangler's innocent sheep reputation worked for the family. Opponents lowered their defenses. The conservatory was Richard's birthday present to the Viscountess. Lady Barbara had walked there at the same time, so the maid believed that Rutger had purposely waited for Lady Barbara to arrive to pluck a flower, and miraculously it coincided with the day Leonia found herself in the palace. There were tiger lilies all over the palace. There was no point in going and plucking them from Viscountess Orr's greenhouse. Just as Calabria wrote, Rutger is very stubborn. The prince was constantly dragging Calabria around, so figuring out that Leonia would soon be in the palace was clearly no problem for him. Could it be that he was waiting for her in the alley? Things looked very suspicious. The next day, Prince Richard's mistress, Barbara Orr, was present in the Hall of Justice with the second Prince Richard Okestroff. The Emperor looked at them and pondered the fact that Leonia was already in his son's crosshairs, and the Empress and Richard had long had their eyes on House Wangler. The man was going to let them play with House Wangler for a while until they let their guard down. There were whispers in the hall that House Wangler, although it had a strong mage in its ranks, still swung too high, and that it would be very humiliating for the family. Leonia asked Rutger about his willingness. He said hesitantly that his dad and mom didn't want a half-blood son, but a useful son. Rutger didn't remember his mom. All he had was his nurse, but she left when he turned 4. After that, the boy was abandoned in an estate on the palace grounds, and his only hope was to eat on time. His father neglected him, and his brothers, learning of his indifference, began to bully him even more. Rutger was like a rat within their walls, a disgrace to the royal family. And today was his only chance to make his existence known to them. And the man who had given the prince this opportunity, Rutger timidly took Leonia's hand. He was trembling. The girl smiled and said that she believed in him. The prince released her hand out of surprise, although he didn't want to. Therefore, he was going to do his best today. Barbara and Rutger stood in front of the Emperor and Empress. There were whispers in the hall about the child's thinness and abuse. Barbara burst into tears, saying that she had tried to protect the greenhouse given by the second prince from desecration, but Leonia had misunderstood her intentions, and in fact the girl had attacked and bitten her. Here stammering Rutger spoke. According to his version, he did not desecrate the greenhouse, but tried to warn the crooks because Mr. and Mrs. Orr cheated the crown. The couple conspired and together stole treasure from the vault of the second Prince Richard. As proof, Rutger provided a gem sold earlier on the black market. Rutger claimed that Mr. and Mrs. Orr had stolen several treasures from the vault of the second Prince Richard. As evidence, he presented a jewel that had been auctioned off on the black market. The ruby tiara worn by the Empress on her wedding day, and even the brooch she had ordered when Prince Richard was born, society whispered. The 8th prince was now very savvy in their eyes, and the 2nd prince was blinded by lust since he hadn't noticed the thefts. Rutger even wore a Tyrian purple suit. The color of the royal family suited him well. In short, Rutger had them interested. While Prince Richard was finessing Barbara, in every way possible, the Viscount and Viscountess Orr hired a fence of stolen goods and a very good artisan to substitute stolen jewelry. They sold many items from the royal treasury. Before Leonia awakened, the Empress, now sitting completely dumbfounded, was the first to guess about these machinations. She had kept it all a secret. afraid of the effect it might have on her son, and then simply blamed it all on Leonia once she and Isaac were married. And thanks to the Empress, Leonia was thrown into prison. Isaac had to grovel to get his wife out. He lay at her feet and even kissed them, but the Empress wasn't satisfied. She took away all the castles and lands Isaac had inherited from the previous Empress. Leonia was released for lack of evidence, but for the rest of her life she was humiliated as a thief. Calabria told her whose work it was, and when Leonia found out, she was furious beyond belief. So now Leonia was glad that Rutger had happened. Now she could get rid of Aur early. All Rutger had to do was tighten the last knot. Everything was going according to plan. The 8th prince continued his monologue saying that the 2nd prince had treated the Aur Chit as friends and they had betrayed his trust. The emperor guessed that Rutger had not guessed everything himself, and here Leonia had intervened in a special way. In the official version, however, the 8th prince, while strolling through the greenhouse, happened to overhear a conversation between the Viscount and Viscountess Aur. Just then they allegedly discussed jewelry from the royal treasury. Rutger did not tell about what he had heard earlier because he decided to warn Barbara quietly, so as not to hurt Prince Richard's feelings. But as soon as he did so, the Viscountess slapped him in the face and even hurt Leonia. Oslo was proud. The prince's training was worth every minute of it. There were quiet chuckles all around. The 8th prince was covering for the 2nd prince. Richard and the Empress had lost before this battle even began. Rutger ended his address by saying that he too belonged to the royal family, and he was sure that His Majesty would make a wise judgment to restore the dignity of the crown. House Wangler then provided a witness, a maid who had been in the greenhouse at the time of that incident. She was promised a handsome reward for her testimony, so that the outcome was known before the trial even began. The maid confirmed the 8th prince's words. She also confirmed that Barbara knew that Rutger belonged to the royal family. The Viscountess, in a fit of impotent rage, rushed towards her, calling her a liar, but she was held back in time. All in all, it made no sense for Barbara to claim that she didn't know about Rutger's origins. She had already insulted the crown, and the punishment that Leonia had then undeservedly received would finally catch up with her true master. The Emperor sentenced Lady and Mr. Aur and their accomplices to scaphism. The culprit in this case was dipped in honey tied to a raft and floated down the swamp. The culprit would die slowly and painfully, watching the insects nibbling on his body. Also, the 8th prince would be lodged in the castle of the 2nd prince Richard as a reward for his loyalty to his brother. At the end of the meeting, the emperor admonished the empress for underestimating the Vanglers and allowing Richard to waste his life. She objected that this would not have happened if Heidegger and Wangler had not been at each other's throats from the beginning. But for the emperor, this excuse had sounded for 10 years. It bored him to tears. Leonia cast a glance at the empress. She wasn't done yet, and she was going to come for this woman soon. Rutger approached Leonia and said that he did not want to live with the 2nd prince, but would like to stay with her, however. Leonia herself did not want that. Leonia did not share Rutger's opinion. Since the emperor had placed him with Richard, he would soon recognize the boy as a prince. It would only have to be patiently awaited. Rutger stiffened in confusion, but obediently lowered his head, agreeing with these words. For Leonia, even in the short time the prince had spent at Wangler Manor, was constantly haunted by his image before waking up. He had no idea what a relief it was for Leonia to be able to escape it, if only briefly, and she prayed that they would not see each other for as long as possible. Leonia received word of Duke Gaiden's return and his army. She had also received a letter from Duchess Marie Pontvibert. In this letter was a violent outburst of emotion, from which it is clear, to accept help from Heidegger, she does not intend to. Leonia, out of nervousness, ordered a hot bath to be prepared. There she was already thinking of removing Mariah and putting in her place someone else, more cooperative. Soon Leonia to apologize for not asking for an audience with the emperor before he granted it. She was ready to accept any punishment for not telling everything in person, but disturbing His Majesty through Prince Rutger. The man assumed that the boy had aroused sympathy in the enchantress, for he had attended the tea party with Calabria and Isaac. Leonia hastened to refute his words. She put it down to rage at being bullied by a member of the royal family, and Prince Rutger represented, according to the sorceress, much more than it might seem. Now in the Emperor's hands was a painting. The man with the spear was Prince Rutger, and the one lying behind him was Gwyden. Duke Heidegger was the strongest swordsman in existence. For a man as a ruler, he was like a stick in two ends. A man who besides everything else is also endowed with the mind of a politician. Leonia could not explain to the Emperor how this would happen because her hand drew the picture itself. Therefore, the sorceress advised to show more interest in Prince Rutger because in the future he could be turned into a chain dog, loyal only to the Emperor. The man suddenly doubted that Leonia was only 9 years old. The girl explained it with the assumption that because of magical abilities to match, her thinking had changed. The Emperor decided to test Leonia's mind to make sure that the insidiousness of Heidegger's blood wasn't starting to kick in. But the sorceress' mind was full of admiration and awe for the Emperor, and contempt with hostility towards the Empress. Such childlike innocence. With this, she greatly pleased the man, for which House Wangler was to be rewarded. A carriage with Prince Rutger soon arrived at the Wangler estate. His Highness handed over a letter from the Emperor. In it, the ruler informed him that he entrusted the 8th prince to Duke Wangler. The Emperor will not be in his debt. When Gwyden returned, he would surely try to get Leonia back, and while they were looking after Prince Rutger, the Emperor could persuade Hyder to allow his daughter to continue living with his late wife's family. The Emperor's message to Leonia stated that Rutger, in the royal family's wolf den, would either become one of them or die. In exchange, the ruler allowed her powers to be used on Isaac and Rutger. It would be up to the enchantress to choose. With rage, Leonia suddenly cursed loudly, unpleasantly startling her entire family. Rutger, seeing this reaction to himself, snickered. Rutger was ready to cry. He knew that Leonia disliked him, but he didn't think her hatred was so great. Seeing how quickly the prince was upset, the Duchess decided to please the unhappy child and promised to make a triple portion of cocoa. The boy brightened up. It was good that he was just a child. Duke Wangler sat down next to his granddaughter. He understood that she wasn't happy to see the prince, but suggested that she consider it an additional part of the victory they had won in court. But Leonia understood the true meaning of the Emperor's words in the letter. If you want to continue to live with the Wanglers, be kind enough to look after Rutger. Leonia thought she was finally rid of him, but now she would have to see his face every single day. But the Emperor had no other options. Melanie Weber, Prince Rutger's personal maid, approached them. Leonia clearly did not understand what this person was doing here. Before her return, Melanie had tried to bend her to her will, taking advantage of her status, for she had cared for the prince since infancy. She shamed Leonia for marrying her 2 brothers in turn, and urged her to obey her master husband in all things. Gwyden was not a loving father, but he was always interested in the quality of his daughter's education, hiring the best teachers to increase her value in the bride market. As crown princess, Leonia was impeccable. She gave no reason to criticize her, much less from a mere maid. This woman didn't understand how a wreck like Leonia could even become a crown princess. Melanie considered herself the only person close to Hrothgar. She played dumb in front of the prince, saying that she didn't understand what the princess was unhappy about. Soon the birthday of Leonia's firstborn son, Amel, was to come when Melanie's constant provocations began to overstep their bounds, since her son had disappeared with her second husband. Leonia had not heard from him. She, as a mother, wanted to know how he was doing, whether he was alive and eating normally. But suddenly Melanie slapped Leonia on the back and ordered her to keep her back straight when she was being brushed. And if this had happened on any other day, Leonia would have closed her eyes. But now, the woman jumped up and reprimanded the maid for crossing every possible boundary in her insolence. At first Melanie was taken aback and mumbled something, but then she clutched the comb tighter and threw it at Leonia with all her might. It flew past right into the mirror, shattering it. The shard left a cut on Leonia's cheek. It was as if Melanie had woken up and said her hand had slipped, and it was Leonia who was to blame. Then Rutger came to her. He did not say a word, but Leonia tried to explain that she was sorry that she had upset the prince's maid. However, today was a sad day for her, and she did not want to talk to him and asked him to leave. Her husband did leave the room, leaving a sobbing Leonia alone. That afternoon she learned that she was pregnant by Rutger. Apparently, he wanted the child to be born healthy, so he had stopped sending Melanie to her. So now Leona asked her grandfather's permission to take care of it personally. The Duke did not know why his granddaughter had such a dislike for the maid, but in any case, all the likely troubles could be easily settled. Therefore, the man allowed it. Leonia told Melanie that they didn't need any more maids. The woman suddenly decided to challenge the noble Duke's daughter's word, replying that she shouldn't. After all, she too came from an aristocratic family and had been sent as Prince Rutger's personal maid by the Empress personally. Therefore, she thought that Leonia had no right to send her back. This was where she made a big mistake, deciding to cover herself with the Empress's name because the Empress didn't care about Rutger. Therefore, Leonia boldly parried this reply. If need be, she could write to His Majesty and ask him to explain why they needed such a stupid person questioning Leonia's authority in the manner. Melanie was stunned. Oslo leaned toward the young mistress, offering to carry out the punishment execution immediately. Leonia agreed and ordered the bluntest axe to be brought. Leonia ordered her to search the estate for the bluntest axe to carry out the execution. Melanie, realizing her predicament, threw herself on her knees and begged for forgiveness. Yet, she remained too proud to stop being angry. Leonia stepped on her hands scraping the ground. She called Melanie demeaning, just dirt under her feet that disgusted her. The maid continued to beg for mercy. Oslo asked Mistress not to soil her shoes in the maid's filthy blood and let him do it. Leonia allowed him to do as he wished and withdrew, not wanting to continue the conversation any further. Compared to what Melanie had done to Leonia in her past life, what had happened today was nothing. The young mistress didn't feel too good. Could it be because it was the first time Leonia had shed someone else's blood herself? Not a very pleasant feeling. She was met by her grandfather. He sat down and said that his granddaughter was too close to the mud today and got a little splashed on her. When that happens, you just have to brush that mud off, that's all. Leonia pressed her lips together. Grandpa had definitely seen everything, but had chosen to trust her unconditionally. She thanked him for that. Several days later, Leonia still hadn't seen any sign of Melanie, which meant Oslo had really taken care of her. In the meantime, Uncle Jan had hired Rutger a teacher, and she praised the boy for his intelligence and enthusiasm for learning. At this rate, according to the teacher, the prince could enter the Imperial Academy in just a year, and Leonia saw this as an opportunity to get the prince out of the manor. Before Leonia left, Rutger asked her how well he was doing. She noticed that the prince's pronunciation had improved. The boy tried to invite her for cocoa, but she wouldn't even listen. Later, Leonia realized that she should have just played along with him instead of avoiding him. But it was too late. Rutger started pelting her with flowers. They lay in front of Leonia's door. Roshan brought them, and a few days later there were flower petals scattered all over the dining room. Noticing her granddaughter's anger, the Duchess of course understood that it was normal to dislike someone. However, Leonia had to politely explain to the person why she wanted to keep her distance. Leonie didn't speak up because she wouldn't be listened to. The Duchess reminded her Rutger was still a child. She wasn't asking her to get along with the prince, but she wanted Leonia to realize that she was stronger than this boy, and a strong man knows how to keep those he doesn't like close to him. After all, he knows that it is worth it for an adversary to step out of line and immediately crush him. Leonia was struck by these words. It turned out that the Duchess was not as simple as it seemed at first glance, and Grandmother wanted Leonia to learn to keep those she disliked close to her. Controlling her emotions could be a serious weapon. Leonia finally understood. She was willing to tolerate Rutger as long as he was useful in supporting Isaac. When Rutger once again brought secretly flowers, the door suddenly opened. Leonia beckoned him inside with her. There Leonia honestly admitted that Rutger disliked her. The prince thought it was because of his weakness, for the maid had always told him that only wicked people like to torment the weak. They don't like weak people. Realizing what she had said, the prince immediately corrected himself, saying that Leonia was not evil, but good. When he saw Leonia bite Lady Barbara's hand, The young mistress looked very angry. And she did it not because she liked Rutger, but because she didn't like seeing someone hurt a child. Therefore, Leonia is a good person in his eyes. The young mistress asked him not to bring her any more flowers. The prince agreed, and glowing with happiness because of their conversation, left. Leonia took a deep breath. If you thought about it that way, Rutger hadn't done anything bad to her yet. But it was hard to treat him normally, and it was hard for Leonia to see him as a child wandering so close. As Leonia drifted off to sleep, she was sure there would be no more flowers. There were no flowers, but there were cookies under her pillow. Enraged by the prince's prank, Leonia came to his chambers. She loudly informed Rutger, frozen with surprise and embarrassment, that she did not like cookies, and especially not cookies in her bed. Who could like food under the pillow anyway? But Rutger thought that in that case no one could steal it and one could eat in peace. Leonia looked at the prince in amazement, then sat down on the edge of the bed. She asked if His Highness always ate while hiding. Tears came to Rutger's eyes. He had been told that feeding him was a waste of food, and that rats should hide when they eat. Leonia had told him not to dare forgive those people. Not to forgive until they sincerely apologized and begged for forgiveness on their knees. Only under those conditions would it not happen again. Leonia guaranteed that those people would regret what they had done. And the enchanted Rutger felt that he would be able to do everything she said. Then Leonia wished the prince sweet dreams and went back to her room. At last Leonia was not disturbed by flowers and cookies. She sat down quietly and asked Oslo about the alchemist she had told him about earlier. Oslo reported they had found him, and the alchemist would be arriving at the manor next week. Melanie's fate was also clarified. Oslo sent her to do hard labor for the slaves, since it is important work. She will be there for the rest of her days. Oslo, as always, did not disappoint and did everything flawlessly. The aide also reported that Rutger, along with Tobias-san, had taken lessons from the commander of House Wangler's vassal knights in wrestling. Even though His Highness may have a weak physique, but according to the commander, there was great potential in him. Rutger's age group would soon be unrivaled since he had begun to grow so frantically. But the problem was that it would take some time for him to adjust to martial arts. Despite his talent, his skills didn't improve. Until at one point he met a master, and it was only with him that his skills began to skyrocket. The greatest spear master of that time. People criticized Rutger for supposedly learning useless tricks from a spearman. But after the first mission, everyone immediately shut their mouths. That day, the prince earned his nickname, Rutger, the Windy Spearman. He earned it by using his opponent's spears when his own were already unusable, but it should still be a long time before that title. But since Leonia was in charge of raising Rutger, on the other hand, it was possible to bring the meeting with the master closer. So Leonia ordered to find a man named Mark. He was a mercenary and a member of the Quinner Company. The Quinner Company did not publicize their existence, and few people had heard of them. Oslo was left to speculate how the young lady could have known about them. When he asked about it, Leonia began to remind him of Lord Heidegger. Prince Isaac was to accompany Lady Leonia to a charity event, and now she was being given a choice of attire. Leonia preferred a satin gown, but it required some adjustment. The young mistress had ordered that 25 centimeters of the hem be cut off, even though it would expose her ankles. The maid, unlike the tailor, was quick to see which way to think and suggested not only shortening, but also removing all the bows and frills. Leonia noted that this maid was very useful. The maid also suggested higher-heeled shoes after trying them on. She was quick-witted, so Leonia liked her more and more. The maid introduced herself as Ilda. Isaac didn't understand why Leonia suddenly decided to do a charity event. Such a thing never solves the underlying problem, no matter how much time and money is spent on it. And this event would also come out horrible since it was planned spontaneously. Leonia came down to them. As soon as he saw her in her new outfit, Isaac realized that he felt strange. Frightened by his emotions, the prince turned away, citing his haste. This feeling had nothing to do with Leonia's beauty. It appeared when she first spoke to the prince and when she told him to become emperor. This feeling was of universal proportions. It fit the situation then, but now It was like a memory, a longing and a surge of unbearable sadness that was burning Isaac from the inside out. Isaac tried to pull himself together and pretend that nothing had happened. Tobias and Rutger were also going to the charity event. However, Leonia called her grandfather, and the Duke quickly pulled Uncle Tobias out of the carriage. As for what to do with His Highness Rutger, it was hard to say. In the end, Leonia just had to put up with his presence. As the young lady was about to rise, she was unexpectedly lifted by Isaac's waist and placed on the floor of the carriage. Rutger frowned and Leonia smiled and thanked the prince. Isaac sincerely hoped it felt like a simple favor. Rutger looked longingly at his fists. He probably wouldn't be able to lift Leonia up. That's when his gaze fell on young Mrs. Heidegger's legs. More specifically on her exposed ankles. The prince asked her if it was even possible to expose them like that. Leonia suddenly said that you have to blend in with the crowd to be normal, surpass the crowd to be hated, and be half a step ahead to lead the crowd. Rutger was confused by this answer, and he looked questioningly at Isaac, hoping for his help. Not hearing any clarification, Rutger asked Isaac about his appearance. It was clear as day that the boy was trying to impress Leonia, however. The Crown Prince reminded him that they were traveling to a charity event in the slums. Rutger himself realized how inappropriate he would look there. Isaac advised him to take off his jacket. He then turned to Leonia. Isaac had agreed to do this for her, but it was also necessary to gain the trust of the common people. However, they tended to forget such things as easily. The crown had allocated a laughable amount of money for the event, and so Leonia put in all the proceeds from the exhibition. The young mistress believed that money could always be made, and that didn't only include the profits from the exhibition, she also had to sell sponsorship to a few nobles. But this was no longer important, because Leonia knew how to further increase her capital. Besides, true and sincere charity would make a lasting impression, and if all went well, people would remember Isaac for a long time. Leonia handed the prince his speech. It was very short, so the people shouldn't be angry because they wouldn't have the patience to listen to the words. Isaac appreciated the speech. Few members of the royal family would understand it, so Leonia was on Isaac's side. The local aristocracy was unhappily discussing the event. If it wasn't for the crown prince and the magician, many of them wouldn't even show up here. The poor people didn't expect much either. Leonia and Isaac were concerned about the tents, as there were more people than expected. The prince was going to ask for help from the vassals and the city guard. Suddenly some girl came up to them and began to mock Leonia, touching on the fact that she had a younger sister, Shireen Heidegger.
So, we look forward to your comments about this story. To not miss new videos, please subscribe to notifications. Thanks for watching.